Hello wrestling fans. Welcome back to the $20 million Pro Wrestle Machine studio and welcome back to the show. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. April 20th, 1998 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Raw record ratings. Flair and WCW issue, tons more. By Observer staff. After returning from Japan, the war between the mighty ships the SS Bischoff and the Titanic has seemingly had the other one heading into the famed iceberg. With business on the surface record-breaking for WCW, the seeds of a disaster not unlike what shot down New Japan at its early 80s peak were being sown behind the scenes as pointed out here regularly. And like the early 80s promotional wars across the ocean, the tide is beginning to turn. Far bigger stories than the end of the WCW Nitro 83-week winning streak due to the Vince McMahon-Steve Austin angle, which began on June 17, 1996. Just weeks before the initials NWO would become an important part of wrestling history, are the internal problems facing the Turner Group and the situation with Ric Flair. Talent and morale problems, none of which were secretive and all of which were building when times were good, were coming to the fore even as times really aren't that bad, but due to the comparison with a hot competitor, they do seem to be from a momentum standpoint. The future of Ric Flair is in doubt, which is probably the biggest story of the week. The situation with the best younger and most talented wrestlers in the company is unchanged, but became far more public knowledge. WCW, which just 2 months ago was the unquestioned top promotion in the country, the company that was way ahead in television, way ahead in talent, way ahead in names and way ahead in vision, forgot what got it to the top, has been producing stale television since the March 23 Nitro. Few good matches, got stale with its booking particularly when it came to main event finishes, and has lost its momentum. This, combined with WWF riding an incredible wave of the same momentum, saw 2 weeks of close WCW victories finally catch up when WWF put on an amazing show on April 13th. Monday Night Raw on April 13th from the Core State Center in Philadelphia, one of the hottest 117 minutes of television in company history, in some ways almost reinventing pro wrestling television, unfortunately with wrestling barely being an afterthought in the product, ending one of the greatest hype jobs for a television match ever, that naturally didn't take place and finished with a 6-minute climax that was as bad as the rest of the show was good. Drew its all-time record rating in a competitive situation, a 4.63 rating, 4.30 first hour, 4.95 seconds hour, and 7.10 share. Nitro did a 4.34 rating, 4.43 first hour, 4.23 seconds hour, 4.38 third hour, and 6.97 share. Nitro Replay did a 1.3 rating and 6.1 share. The total head-to-head combined audience for the 2 hours fell just shy of last week's all-time record. Raw's rating was the second highest in the history of the show and highest ever in a competitive situation. Raw broke not only its quarter-hour audience record, but the all-time competitive quarter-hour audience record set just last week by the first Sting vs. Kevin Nash match, with a match that never took place which did a 6.0 rating and 10.2 share in 4,414,000 homes. Going head-to-head with the Sting vs. Kevin Nash WCW title rematch in the time slot WCW has owned for the past 2 years, which did a 4.3 rating and 3,145,000 homes, the combined 10.3 rating and 7,559,000 homes set yet another quarter-hour all-time record. The timing of the WWF's heating up of interest couldn't have been worse, because starting April 27th, Nitro will be getting bounced around due to NBA hoops for 4 weeks, leaving Raw to build momentum and probably set ratings records going unopposed. Raw opened the show with Austin challenging McMahon to a title match, and recognizing the lesson from the ratings the previous week, kept up with clips of McMahon getting advice from Jerry Briscoe and Pat Patterson throughout the show, until the climactic scene at the end where McMahon was about to get in the ring for the first time. They dramatically built heat by McMahon, who came out strutting like he was Buddy Rogers, never locking up for several minutes as McMahon demanded Austin tie his right hand behind his back since Austin said he could beat McMahon with one hand tied behind his back. As McMahon got ready in the corner, doing more of a UFC gimmick than a pro wrestler, Dude Love showed up, setting up his heel turn into apparently be Austin's foe on the April 26th pay-per-view from Greensboro. It could also end up being McMahon, although not as a secret foe, as that would need direct hype to work. Love tried to stop the match, but McMahon shoved him down. Love tried to put the mandible claw on McMahon, but was stopped, and wound up attacking and destroying Austin, who had one hand tied behind his back. Unfortunately, the crowd reaction to this was heat, but the wrong kind, the kind they had when the unforgiving crowd booed as Bob Holly missed a Frankensteiner, and not the kind they had as McMahon delivered his heel interviews earlier in the show. Fans were mad that the match hype for 2 hours was a fraud, and despite Austin having one hand tied behind his back being pummeled, nobody cared about that aspect of the angle. While the hype was amazing, people leaving the building were mad about not only the payoff, but what followed after TV ended, an 8-man tag with Austin and LOD 2000 and Undertaker beating New Age Outlaws and Hunter Hearst Helmsley and Kane that went only 149 before Austin pinned John with a stunner. But the biggest story was taking place before either show ever got started, and really began 1 week earlier. WCW announced the previous Monday that Ric Flair would be on Thunder on April 9th in Tallahassee, Florida to make an announcement concerning his career. The idea was for Flair to announce the reformation of the Four Horsemen, which the plans at the time were to include Bill Goldberg, Lex Luger and one other individual, not Chris Benoit, whose spot wasn't completely finalized with Arn Anderson returning as the manager for the group. However, Flair, who worked house shows on April 7th and April 8th in Fort Myers and Fort Pierce, Florida, and when given tickets for the tour, was given tickets to fly home late Wednesday night, had already made plans to go to Detroit the next morning where his 9-year-old son Ric Flair was going to compete in his age group AAU Freestyle Wrestling Nationals from April 9th to April 11th. His son ended up winning at the Pontiac Silverdome in the 9 to 10 age group and 112-pound weight class, capturing the championship match by a 9-3 score. There were problems all week as Flair claimed he had asked for the time off to accompany his son to the tournament long ago, and it wasn't until Monday that he was given any kind of word he was expected at television. Flair's new contract stipulations did call for him to be at every television taping. It was touch and go until Thursday, when Bischoff returned from Japan and Flair wasn't in Tallahassee, and a makeshift angle with Anderson, Bischoff, Scott Steiner and Luger was thrown together. Bischoff was livid and openly talking about either firing Flair, which would be the irrational move given the lay of the land today, or suspending him, which appears to be the most likely alternative. Flair had already received legal threats from WCW regarding being under contract for 3 years with a nice-sized raise, but allegedly having business negotiations with the WWF. Still, Bischoff was prepared to turn this situation into an angle, seeing the success WWF was having with the McMahon-Austin angle, an angle that was supposed to start on April 13th in Flair's former hometown of Minneapolis. The Target Center had sold out for the Nitro tapings just hours after tickets had been put on sale, with it being declared Ric Flair Day the biggest advance ever in the city, the second largest gate in the long and storied history of wrestling in the Twin Cities market and the first sellout of a major arena in that market in nearly 15 years. But there was no Flair. Before the show, Bischoff had a meeting with the wrestlers, largely to get his side across to the boys over a real tense situation, coming just a few weeks after the debacle which wound up with Sean Waltman needlessly becoming a free agent and signing with the WWF. Bischoff had been the subject of tremendous heat among most of the top wrestlers with his bluntness with them about their positions in the company and with his unwavering belief that it was Hogan that brought WCW to its new position. Bischoff's tremendous success has, many would say, has resulted in an equal amount of arrogance and that he hitched himself too closely with Hogan, and many feel Hogan all by himself is not what got WCW to this level. He said that he was going to try and be nicer to everyone at the tapings and that he was told by Diamond Dallas Page that he'd become an asshole and he would try and change. He then began talking about Flair, claiming that when they had made the new deal, he said that Flair's agreement was to appear at all live television tapings, and if he ever needed a night off, he was to contact Barry Bloom, his agent, who would have to submit the request in writing with 10 days' notice. There were reports Flair asked for the date off months ago, but those may not be true, and those close to Bischoff were adamant in pointing out that it wasn't until recently that Flair would have even known his son would have qualified for nationals. What appears to have happened, although this would have to be called at best educated speculation, is that since Flair had been taken off television several weeks ago and been given no date of when he'd be brought back, he may not have felt the need to ask for the day off, since he wasn't booked on the weekend house shows. And then at the last minute they wanted him to return for the TV, and that's where the problem came up. Bischoff said when Bloom, who is in a really weird situation now because he has represented both Flair and Bischoff, and so many others including Waltman, contacted Flair, the end result was Flair calling Nick Lambros and attempting to renegotiate his contract. Bischoff told the wrestlers his plan was to reform the Horsemen, calling Luger probable as one of the members and listing the final slot as going to Kevin Green. The belief is that would be temporary and it would eventually go to Dean Malenko, although Malenko is trying to get out of his contract. Bischoff also brought up his plan to start a McMahon-Austin feud with he and Flair, although instead of comparing it to the WWF angle, said he got the idea from the problems with Jerry Reinsdorf and Michael Jordan with the Chicago Bulls. He then told the wrestlers that everyone that has ever known Flair knows that he isn't a man of his word, but said that people have always looked the other way because he's Ric Flair. He finished by saying he was going to set an example with Flair. Exactly what that entails is unclear, as it isn't believed Flair has even gotten any word as to the situation. There is some speculation that some of this could even be a Japanese-style angle, although Bischoff did bring up the planned angle in his speech to the wrestlers. If it is an angle, those closest to the situation, and it appeared the vast majority, if not all of the wrestlers, believed it to not be one. Whether Flair will be suspended and have legal action taken against him for a contract breach, or be brought back at some point after a waiting period, is unclear. Word was given to the WCW website to remove all references to Flair, both current and historical. Given the landscape, it would be almost a mind-boggling business decision for Bischoff to fire Flair outright, so that would be the last thing expected. Georgia, where all WCW contracts are executed, is a right-to-work state, which means there is only so much time he could be suspended without pay if there is another company willing to hire him, and at this point WWF would hire him in a heartbeat. Flair had been talking about retiring, not so much by his preferred choice as much as due to the pressures of working for the company that may not respect his legacy, so that is another potential option. Those close to him say that Flair may be at the stage of his life where he is willing to do a Kareem Jabbar-like retirement tour in every major city, but wasn't sure if he would trust it in the hands of WCW. Flair's future is hardly the only one in question in WCW. Over the weekend, when ECW ran a house show in Philadelphia, several WCW wrestlers, including Chris Jericho, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, Mang, Scotty Riggs and Scott Hall, all at one time or another for various reasons came to the show. The Hall situation may be the most talked about, but is in reality probably just a trivial story. Malenko and Guerrero were making it clear to the wrestlers and others backstage that they wanted out of their WCW deals, which, like Chris Benoit's, end in November of 1999. The remark Bischoff made about not putting asses in the seats rubbed all of them the wrong way. Malenko, through his lawyer, has been attempting since his hiatus to find a way out of his contract and doesn't want to go back. Jericho's deal ends earlier, but with him getting the big push right now, he appeared to be less likely to leave than before, although there has been attempts at putting a Benoit, Guerrero, Jericho package together. Because the situation with New Japan and WCW is unclear, the options of those wrestlers can't be certain. If WCW and New Japan go their separate ways, the options appear to be either doing an ECW plus New Japan package or WWF. It is no secret ECW covets Benoit perhaps more than any single wrestler in the business as a potential world champion, because Paul Heyman believes he can make him a superstar, and because it basically guarantees a great world title match on every pay-per-view and a person who he could push as the most credible world champion in the game. At its current financial situation, ECW could probably offer a competitive deal, although not by any means at the level WWF could, but perhaps competitive given New Japan could augment it if the chips fall the right way, for 2, perhaps 3 major new players, but probably no more than that. If WCW and New Japan go their separate ways, and given the climate, I'd bet against that happening right now, because WWF would no doubt be very quick to try and make the deal. A WWF/New Japan deal would greatly hurt ECW's shots at any of the aforementioned wrestlers. The other key piece of talent, whose contract is coming due in about 2 months, is Rey Mysterio Jr. WWF is close to, or perhaps already had finalized deals that almost forced them to develop Spanish-speaking superstars, ironically deals that were proposed to and talked about in WCW for more than a year but never got completed. WWF has done a poor job of marketing smaller wrestlers, even destroying the credibility of Taka Michinoku, up to this point, so that's the other end of that equation. It's no secret most of the Mexican talent in WCW is unhappy with its treatment, particularly in the wake of the Juventud Guerrera unmasking, although again, with the exception of Mysterio Jr., virtually every Mexican wrestler under contract to WCW has just under 2 years left. It appears that if the WWF offer is in the ballpark of WCW's, that Mysterio Jr., whose knee won't be ready for a return until after his contract expires in about 2 months, won't ever wrestle another match in WCW. The Hall situation was just one of those weird things that happened. Hall, who lives in the area, went to the ECW house show on April 11th in Kissimmee, Florida with just incredible PJ Walker, a friend from the WWF days. When he got to the back at about 5 p.m., before the crowd had arrived, word went through the dressing room and he was confronted by, among others, Shane Douglas, Bam Bam Bigelow, Chris Candido, and Francine. Douglas, Bigelow, and Candido all had heat with him stemming from their days in the WWF when the Clique ruled the company, and for various reasons all believe they had fallen victim to their power. The situation, which lasted about 10 minutes, was described as tense with potential for problems, but all were sitting down and talking, although Douglas was said to be tense with veins bulging as he cut a promo on Hall similar to interviews he's given in so many places about his WWF experience working with Hall as Dean Douglas. Bigelow, who left the WWF largely other problems with McMahon's catering to the clique, was backing him up and making references to ECW not needing people with Hall's problems in their dressing room. After about 10 minutes, Hall called a cab and left, but not before Francine yelled at him to get in line and buy a ticket like the rest of the marks, and a humorous situation where Tommy Dreamer, not knowing what was happening, walked by and saw everyone sitting down and Hall needing a ride and offered to give him a ride home. On April 18, Jerry Lawler, Dave Brown, Bill Dundee, Randy Hales, WMC Television, and a Memphis tradition for decades, Saturday Morning Live Wrestling, returns. The show, which ran without interruption in the Memphis market from the 1960s, when longtime wrestling announcer Lance Russell was working as a program director at WHBQ in Memphis and decided to experiment with live wrestling in what was traditionally a time slot aimed at young children. The results were astounding, and the tradition started moving to WMC TV in the late 70s, and continuing until the United States Wrestling Association Limited, the descendant of parent companies such as Championship Wrestling and Warrior Sports, folded operations amidst a legal battle for ownership in late September. In its box office heyday in the late 70s, with Lawler as the top draw, Memphis Wrestling over a full year period averaged more than 7,500 fans per show every Monday night at the Mid-South Coliseum. In its television heyday in the early and mid-80s, the wrestling show drew more viewers in the Memphis market than virtually every prime-time network show, peaking with a 23 rating average and regular shares in excess of 70. The show was so popular locally that once in its heyday a World Series game that NBC was covering nationally was tape delayed so as not to preempt the more highly rated local wrestling show. Over the next decade, the promotion steadily declined, particularly after Lawler became a heel on WWF television while trying to maintain a babyface presence locally, to where house shows were down to drawing a few hundred, although television ratings, while less than a quarter of what they were in the heyday, were still competitive. Eventually in 1997, the show was moved from its live Saturday morning slot to a midnight slot, due to a Bill Clinton mandate of stations needing to allot a certain number of hours to children's programming. The show only lasted a few weeks in the new slot before the string of incompetence and deception began unraveling at a rapid order. Before it was all completed, Mark Selker, who had taken over as president of USWA Limited after gathering a group of investors to purchase a majority interest in the company from Lawler, who had owned 50%, and purchased the other 50% from Jerry Jarrett the previous December, had initiated several failed legal attempts, and some which are still being battled out, including charging the defendants with racketeering and fraud. Lawler himself countersued Mark and Eugene Selker and the artist formerly known as Larry Burton for many points, key among them breach of contract and also for slander in the case of the Selkers. Just before resigning as general manager of WMC TV 2 weeks ago, Mason Granger signed a 3-year deal with Hales where the station would pay him $1,500 per week to produce the television show and that the station would, as it had in the past, paid for the production of the show. That deal, where the company never had to pay for television production or for television time in its key market, had been one of the reasons, along with the notoriously low overhead, why USWA had survived after every other regional company from the 80s had failed, and why as recently as just a few years ago when the entire business was in an economic slump, the USWA was the only profitable full-time wrestling company in the country. Granger put the show in its traditional time slot, making the quip that Clinton can mandate stations to show children's programming, but he can't mandate kids to watch that programming, as ratings in that time slot that WMC owned for 20 years had slipped to almost nothing. The idea on paper is for Hales is to only run shows within about a 100-mile radius of Memphis, the WMC penetration area, staying away from the competitive markets in places like Louisville and Nashville that were USWA strongholds but now have several different smaller groups fighting over them. Lawler claims the company doesn't need a money man, as some from the outside are alleging Lawler to be for Hales, because of existing guaranteed casino show dates to where the company can operate in the black from the start, since it is getting paid to produce television and not having to pay for production and television time like virtually every other small promotion. The story of the fall of the USWA and the lawsuits from its remains is an interesting tale of fantasy, fraud, comedy, deception, and greed, all revolving around several main parties, the most prominent of which are Selker, Lawler, and most prominent of all, Lawrence Bertman. According to the lawsuit, Larry Burton was born Lawrence Bertman and has also been known as Larry Bartman, Lawrence Bergland, Larry Bergfield, Tony Franco, and Jason Todd in various other lifetimes. In a lawsuit currently outstanding, XL Sports is suing Bertman, Lawler, Stacey Carter, Lawler's girlfriend who worked as a television announcer in the dying days of the company, Roberta Bertman, Larry's wife, Jason Bertman, his son, Elliot Pollock, a sports agent and disbarred New York attorney who was involved with the USWA promotion and is currently one of the two most noted sports agents representing pro wrestlers in the country after being initiated into the business on a chance meeting with Brian Pillman at the 1996 NATPE convention. Barry Bloom, the most noted wrestling agent in the industry with clients that have included Ric Flair, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Ken Shamrock, Jesse Ventura, Gene Okerlund and Bret Hart, David Lilly, a Burton assistant, William Behrens, former USWA television syndicator and current and future complete owner of Music City Wrestling, Hazel Lawler, Jerry's mother, Mariana Zuck, a former secretary of the Selkers who allegedly was feeding Burton proprietary information in their battle for control. The lawsuit is the latest installment of a case which began in Ohio right after the folding of the company and was thrown out of court. It moved to bankruptcy court in Memphis, where the Selkers wanted it contested as a bankruptcy case, only to find that venue to not be nearly as forgiving as they had liked. They have attempted to move it back into civil court and to dismiss the bankruptcy proceedings. However, the bankruptcy judge presiding over the case is stalling that game from being played. Lawler's countersuit is largely over, as part of his agreement to sell the company to Burton and Selker for $2 million, being given a 5-year contract at $300,000 per year to work with the company in both a front office capacity and as talent, and never getting paid on that contract since the company folded. It is for those legal reasons that the new Memphis company is listed entirely in Hale's name as 100% owner of the new company called Memphis Power Pro Wrestling. Both Lawler and Hales claim Lawler will be nothing but talent with the new group, although naturally speculation revolves around that Lawler's involvement with the new group is more than is being said. Parts of the Selker lawsuit are an interesting entangled web of deception, all based on the classic wrestling premise of selling a territory to a money mark that doesn't understand the business at a high price, and then when they destroy the business, buying it back at a low price, a strategy certainly not invented but in recent decades popularized by Ronald Fuller Welch and the old Southeastern promotion. The basic facts are well known. XL Sports, a consortium of 22 investors, raised and borrowed $1.1 million for 55% of the company almost immediately after Lawler had paid Jerry Jarrett $187,500 for his 50% of the company that Jarrett himself was planning on folding because it was no longer profitable or worth his time. Of that $1.1 million, $339,213 was capital raised by XL Sports, a company put together by Mark and Eugene Selker specifically for this purchase, and the remainder was borrowed by XL Sports, largely from the same group of investors. Depending upon how you look at it, it was either a great business play by Lawler, an elaborate con job, or complete stupidity and naivete by XL Sports and Mark Selker. As is usual in situations of this type, it was probably a little of each. How the courts sort this all out is one thing, but it appears that XL Sports bought the USWA for far more than it was worth, at least considering the revenue it had been generating, but also did absolutely no research work on its investment going in, to the point the new ownership group of USWA, which began negotiations with Burton on August 17, 1996, had never even heard of the name or knew of the existence of a Jerry Jarrett until September 1997, months after paying 7 figures for its stock in the company. The investors bought the company without ever seeing the company's financial books, which Jarrett was in charge of since he had more of a businessman's mind than Lawler. Burton is an interesting story in himself. According to the lawsuit, over the last 2 decades he had at least 22 known arrests under various names in various parts of the country from Connecticut to Ohio to Michigan to Southern California. Charges included assault, resisting arrest, possession of marijuana, false information concerning bombs, aggravated assault with a knife, altering checks, armed robbery, shooting with intent to wound, assault with intent to kill, intimidating a witness, grand theft, sexual assault, receiving stolen property, possession, transportation and selling of controlled substances, and contempt of court. In 1976, Lawrence Bertman allegedly filed with the Social Security Administration in Cleveland a claim that Lawrence Bertman was deceased and the Social Security Administration paid death benefits based on that claim. Boy, is that going to give a bunch of pro wrestlers ideas. According to the lawsuit, the artist formerly known as Larry Burton first met Lawler in 1993 at a WWF house show in Detroit. He later met Vince McMahon in 1995. He at one time was even associated with Tank Abbott. His first business dealings with Lawler was as the agent for Matt Osborne, who Lawler brought to Memphis for a very short stint as Doink the Clown after he had been fired by the WWF. It isn't believed he had any direct business relationship with the WWF, although he was called to do favors, most notably setting up the production for the 1996 taping of a Roddy Piper vs. Goldust Street Brawl that was inserted purportedly live but actually taped 1 month earlier into the broadcast of the WrestleMania that took place at the Arrowhead Pond in Anaheim, California. Burton and Selker's business dealings began on August 17, 1996, when they set up a meeting to discuss wrestling t-shirt business that Lawler and Carter attended. According to the lawsuit, a meeting Burton claimed to have a relationship with both Lawler and McMahon that authorized him to broker deals involving both the USWA and WWF, and that Bloom was involved in all his business dealings. The lawsuit claims Bloom told Selker that Burton was a successful television producer, a savvy marketing person with great business acumen, and that Pollock would be assisting Bloom in negotiating the deal between Burton and Mark Selker. The suit claims Burton and Lawler told Mark Selker that Lawler was the exclusive owner of the USWA with the exception of a minor interest held by his mother, Hazel Lawler, although at the time Jarrett owned 50% of the company. After a few weeks of negotiations, Selker, Burton, Pollock and Bloom allegedly reached a deal where Selker would get the rights to produce and design t-shirts for USWA, WWF, Major League Soccer, The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, and Disney World. Selker paid Lawler $45,000 as a royalties advance for the USWA t-shirt rights. At the time, Burton produced a contract signed by Lawler giving him worldwide exclusive merchandising rights to market all intellectual property of the USWA for 5 years. Supposedly a commercial was to begin airing on the USWA television show on November 23, 1996 as part of the deal marketing the t-shirts. The commercial never aired. The lawsuit alleges that if it had aired, it would have alerted Jarrett to the deal. At the time, USWA had given all its television time to WCW, although in later months Lawler, Burton and Behrens had maneuvered that deal into the hands of WWF. The lawsuit claimed Burton told XL Sports on December 26, 1996 that the deal had been completed with the WWF and McMahon, although there is no indication any such deal was a reality. While this was going on, Burton informed Mark Selker that there was a good chance for the two of them to buy the USWA outright. On January 15, 1997, according to the suit, Burton told XL not to make an issue over the commercial for the t-shirts not airing on USWA because the USWA going to be bought by either by himself, the Selkers, or by McMahon, and at that point, the commercials would begin airing. Where Titan Sports get involved in the lawsuit is the claim that Burton, Lawler, McMahon, Bruce Pritchard, Jim Ross, Shane McMahon and Arnold Skolland had a meeting with Mark Selker telling them Burton was a respected television producer and well known within the wrestling industry. Burton had told Mark Selker he was getting a deal buying the company for only $1.1 million because Lawler was unaware of the potential income from television advertising sales the business could generate. Lawler claims to have been aware of the potential income the shows could generate, but that he and Jarrett ran a low overhead company and weren't willing to spend the money to hire people to attempt to sell the time. The lawsuit claimed that Burton told Mark Selker that McMahon was at any time willing to buy the USWA from the Selkers and Burton for $6 million, and that the reason McMahon wasn't buying it directly from Lawler is because Lawler had personal animosity toward McMahon and would never sell the company to him. The crux of the deal, according to Lawler, is that Selker raised $1.5 million, spent $1.1 million on the purchase, promised his group called XL Sports they'd make double on their investment, or $2.2 million, then sell his 55% to McMahon for $3.3 million, and have $1.1 million for himself in profits on the sale. Lawler claims that everything fell apart in September when the realization hit that McMahon wasn't going to buy the company for $6 million. At one point, Titan Sports did propose a deal to Burton that they would guarantee the territory an agreed upon amount of money per week running shows as a downside guarantee, basically an agreement to lease the territory. Titan would provide the wrestlers, which would be largely the younger wrestlers they wanted to send there for seasoning, and pay the wrestlers, book the territory, set up a training school in Memphis, remember the rumors about Tom Pritchard moving to Memphis and running a wrestling school, and guarantee Burton and Selker a certain amount per week. In exchange, WWF and Burton and Selker would split any profits 50-50. Selker turned down the leasing arrangement even though it theoretically guaranteed a profitable territory because at that point WWF would have had no incentive to ever buy the territory and in a sense would be controlling it anyway without making any kind of big money payment for it. The lawsuit claimed that Burton, or those close to him, had purported him to be a successful TV and film producer, including producing the famous television show Taxi, and that he was an independent producer for Disney. According to P.J. Montrone, one of the plaintiffs in the suit, the reason they believed Burton, even though one could check on any given day in any given market reruns of the popular show and see Burton's name never listed as producer, is because Burton told them he didn't need the publicity of having his name listed in the credits. It claimed Burton told XL Sports stockholders that in 1996, The USWA had net profits in excess of $500,000, but that Lawler, purported to them to be 100% owner, reported substantially less to the IRS on his tax return because there was a huge amount of cash income generated by the business. But in reality, according to the lawsuit, any profits from the USWA in 1996 were negligible. After receiving the original money on the t-shirt deal, 2 weeks later, Burton told Selker there would be an opportunity to buy the USWA business. At the same time, Lawler and Burton began negotiating to buy out Jarrett. The lawsuit claimed that Jarrett had no idea he was being bought out because Lawler had another investor buying in, while Lawler said Jarrett was fully aware there was an outside buyer for his stock, saying that they had always heard stories of people paying big money to buy wrestling territories and wondered why they had never found anyone in all the years they ran the area, and that Lawler told Jarrett they had finally found someone. Burton claimed under oath in a later deposition that he had told Eugene Selker about the negotiations with Jarrett and that Selker approved the purchase. In the same deposition, Burton claimed to not know of his own current marital status. Jarrett gave his price to Lawler and didn't want the headaches of dealing with the sale. On November 15, 1996, Jarrett paid Lawler $187,500 and purportedly paid Burton $62,500 for brokering the deal, making it a $250,000 deal. Under oath, Burton claimed that he didn't know if he had received the $62,500 or not. While Lawler expected to imminently sell the company and make a huge profit on the deal, he said he was putting himself on the line financially and buying Jarrett out in case the Selker deal and the Burton deal fell through. Lawler and Burton, after completion of the sale, signed a sales agreement that would entitle Burton to buy 100% of the company from Lawler in increments during 1997 for a total purchase price of $2 million. At the same time the deal was signed, Burton signed Lawler to the $300,000 per year 5-year exclusive contract as a wrestler that would allow him to work outside dates only with WWF. The lawsuit claims Lawler and Burton never informed Selker of XL's stockholders that Lawler didn't own 100% of the company at the time the negotiations were ongoing, and that Lawler and Burton had both claimed to Jarrett the expected sale price of the company was $500,000 and not $2 million. While this was going on, although the Selkers never saw the company books, they were given a document that, among other things, listed Burton as Vice President of Television and Media Productions with the USWA with a $750,000 per year salary, apparently to show the company was generating enough income to pay an executive that kind of a salary. The lawsuit claimed the document was a fraud because Lawler didn't have the authorization from Jarrett to hire anyone for that kind of money, not to mention that the company itself probably wasn't even taking in $1 million per year. Lawler's explanation for that is that Burton was hired on a sliding scale, which could have gone up to $750,000 had he increased profits in the company commensurate with earning that kind of a salary. The suit stated that Burton on November 15, 1996 had told XL Sports and its stockholders he had negotiated a deal to sell the USWA for $6 million to McMahon once he had purchased 100% of the company from Lawler. Burton told XL that while Lawler would accept a bank wire transfer or a bank draft from them, he would only accept cash from Burton, which would explain why there is no paper trail of Burton paying Lawler $1 million, although Lawler claims to have received the money from Burton and the lawsuit alleges there was no payment to begin with. The lawsuit also claimed that on January 15, 1997, Burton told XL that Pollock, acting as his agent, had received an $8 million offer for the purchase of the USWA from a cable television group in New York. Burton also informed them allegedly at that time that they couldn't begin selling television ad time until they had bought Lawler out because if Lawler were to find out the potential television ad income revenue, he might back out of the deal. After the deal had been agreed to, but before XL had finished payment of its $1.1 million to Lawler on June 6, 1997, XL hired a media consultant to produce a report analyzing the USWA business. The consultant flew to California to meet with Burton, who would supposedly have meetings with celebrities such as Rocky Rowe, a baseball umpire, Jeff Conaway, actor best known for his roles in Taxi and Grease who had a television production company with Burton, Christopher Lloyd, a movie star with numerous major credits including the Back to the Future series whose career got jump-started with his role on Taxi, and Michael Eisner of Disney. The two did meet with Conaway, and Burton told the consultant, who was later hired at a $125,000 per year plus commissions salary by USWA after finishing his report, they were scheduled for a meeting with Eisner, but Burton told the consultant that he needed a medical checkup at the same time and it would be harder for him to get the checkup because he could schedule an appointment with Eisner at any time. On July 12, 1997, after the sale to Burton and XL Sports had been completed and at which point Lawler was only talent with a figurehead front office position, the USWA held a live event in Memphis using 7 wrestlers from ECW through Paul Heyman. The lawsuit claimed that Burton told XL Sports the company had to pay each wrestler $1,500 for the show, and that because of that, the show, which drew the company's biggest gate of the year, ended up at the end of the night losing $7,000. Heyman claimed the USWA wrestlers who worked the show were under weekly salary to him and that Burton paid them each some money out of his own pocket, but they did the show as a favor to Lawler since Lawler worked ECW and that there was no $1,500 payment per wrestler to ECW. By this point in time, both Selker and Burton had each hired friends at high salaries to work in the front office for a company that was still not generating any revenue to speak of, along with paying $2,500 per month for office space and Selker renting a $2,500 house in Memphis. One of the people that Burton hired was Patrick P.J. Montrone, who in the lawsuit later claimed that from 1995 through 1997 he was lured by Burton into a business venture involving the operation of a baseball card shop in Orange, California with Burton's son, which lost $275,000, and after the company folded became one of Selker's major allies. As the company was flaming out, Burton and Selker turned on each other, as Burton had a meeting with two of XL's major stockholders claiming Selker had embezzled $34,000, mismanaged the business and wasted company money, and that because of that, McMahon was losing interest in buying the company. The two stockholders had then went with Burton to attempt to make a sale to McMahon, and signed a letter condemning Selker's running the company. The suit claims on September 18, 1997, Burtman went to Tennessee probate court and changed his name from Larry Burtman or Larry Burton, and received a Tennessee's driver's license using a fictitious address on the application. When it became obvious that the $6 million sale to McMahon wasn't going to go through, and when the Selkers found out about Jarrett's actual sales price, it resulted in a legal situation that closed the territory and wound up in court. Currently, XL Sports is being represented by Larry Parrish, perhaps the most high-profile attorney in Memphis. Just this past week, Parrish was the subject of a front-page story in the Memphis Commercial Appeal because a judge disqualified him as a special prosecutor from going after a topless club owner because of private interests that funded him, leaving him with a financial interest in what he was doing as a special prosecutor. They filed for Chapter 11 reorganization to protect them from creditors, but since they admitted no plans of restarting the company, it was switched to a Chapter 7 total liquidation. XL, not wanting that because the question of how they could afford Parrish when they had no money would have to be answered, then attempted to move it from bankruptcy court to federal court, which is the state of the lawsuit at present. A funny thing happened on the way to the expected highest television rating of the year for pro wrestling. They put it on a samurai drama instead. And likely because of that, the show, based around the retirement of Antonio Inoki at the Tokyo Dome, drew about a 10.0 rating in the 7 to 9 p.m. time slot on April 6th, much lower than all expectations going in, including some predictions the rating would near 20.0. In contrast, in January, when they aired a similar show on Riki Choshu's retirement from 11:30 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. on a late Sunday night time slot, but concentrated more on the matches from the Tokyo Dome show earlier that evening, the show drew an 8.1 rating, which is far more impressive given the difference between the two time slots, also because Inoki was a far bigger cultural figure in Japan than Choshu. TV Asahi's 2-hour prime-time wrestling show, instead of being a pro wrestling show covering the April 4th Tokyo Dome card, became Antonio Inoki, This Is Your Life, complete with actors acting out traumatic scenes in the young life of Inoki, such as the death of his father, his uncle and his wrestling teacher Rikidozan. The show also featured clips of Inoki's most famous matches, and actually turned out to be coincidentally a near duplicate of the lead story in last week's Observer, leaving out things like his political and embezzlement scandals and his match with Leon Spinks, all building up to his final match against Don Fry. The only matches from the Dome show that aired were clips of the first round of the final Inoki tournament, Brian Johnston vs. Naoya Ogawa and Fry vs. Igor Mindert, the complete tournament final, Ogawa vs. Fry, and finally ending the show with Inoki vs. Fry. The show also featured many famous celebrities in Japan along with current wrestling stars Keiji Muto, Masahiro Chono and Shinya Hashimoto talking about their favorite Inoki matches, leading to clips of those matches. It was built around not only Inoki, with scenes interspersed between the clips of Inoki coming to the building and getting ready for his last match, but also Ichiro Furutachi, a New Japan television announcer from the late 70s and early 80s who had gone on to become a major television celebrity in Japan stemming from his fame broadcasting weekly prime-time wrestling matches. Not only would Inoki wrestle his final match, but Furutachi would return to announce his final match. Clips were shown with Furutachi, who at times seemed emotional, returning to the world that started his career and made him famous, linked with the performer he was most well known in conjunction with, almost like a Japanese equivalent to Howard Cosell returning for one final boxing match with Muhammad Ali. Virtually every match mentioned in last week's Observer at least those starting with the Dory Funk Jr. title match in 1969, and all the famous bouts in the 70s and 80s from Kobayashi, to Thez, to Gotch, to Hogan, to Andre, to Singh, to Oki, to Sakaguchi, to Butcher, to Vader, to Fujinami, to Choshu, to Ruska, to Wepner, to Everett, to Williams. The Spinks match apparently having been erased from his history along with his embezzlement scandal, were shown in clip form, building up to Inoki's most famous match of his career against Ali in 1976, which, due to erasing of memories over time, has become something in history that is altogether different from what it was when it actually happened. The scene was set with clips of Ali and Inoki hyping the fight. Ali in his prime did pro wrestling interviews better than all but 2 or 3 pro wrestlers in history. Even watching from today's standpoint clips of things more than 20 years ago, Ali was a better talker than Steve Austin and blew away nearly everyone else in this business known for their mic skills, probably trailing only Ric Flair as his most motivated best, if he were suddenly transplanted to the present in today's pro wrestling world. His skills building up the Inoki match were a stark contrast to the Ali of today, who appeared live at the Dome show and was featured later in the show. Unlike the award-winning movie, When We Were Kings, which chronicled the build-up in the fight where Ali won the heavyweight boxing title from George Foreman 2 years earlier in Zaire, that film ended with the Ali of yesteryear with viewers being able to leave on a happy note, not having to deal with the reality of the long-term effects of all that Ali did that left people on a happy note. This television show, showing the glib, effervescent Ali hyping the fight, along with clips of the fight with Ali and or at least near enough his athletic prime, only served to make the shock value that much greater when contrasted with the Ali of today, who was the special guest at the show, which makes the scorecard item in the April 13th Sports Illustrated largely talking about Floyd Patterson stemming from the UFC lawsuit depositions even more of a poignant piece. There is something unbelievably troubling having to witness, right before your eyes, the contrast of one of the most famous athletes of his time, with the reality of what the end result, some 2 decades later, is of the ravages of the sport that made him famous. Although there were celebrities, from famous actors and athletes, mainly Japanese but several foreigners as well, most notably K1 superstar Andy Hug along with Americans like Jeff Blatnick, Eric Bischoff, and Bob Backlund, it was Ali who was the featured guest. The television show acknowledged the presence of them sitting in the crowd, but even Akira Maeda, who live apparently got a pop in the building that rivaled Inoki and Ali's, was never actually featured on the television show. Ali came out before the Inoki ring introduction to duplicate his torch lighting ceremony from the 1996 Olympic Games. It was sad to see, just seconds after seeing his verbal and ring skills in the 70s, to see the same man who appeared to be oblivious to where he was and what he was doing, come out shaking with a blank look on his face and needing someone literally to hold his hand and glide it so he could light the torch. At this point Inoki came out with the ring entrance rampway lit up with a sea of torches. Realistically, most of the crowd came to the show more to see Inoki's final ring entrance and curtain call than the matches. There is probably no wrestler in history, not Hogan in his prime, not Austin today, who can match an Inoki ring entrance, particularly live since television can't capture the unique, almost hypnotic crowd reaction. This was not nearly as spectacular compared to the major production number a few years earlier in the same building for Inoki's last super match of his lifetime a few years back against Big Van Vader, so as to keep the focus on Ali's involvement as the key point. Even the closing ceremony, with all the various celebrities congratulating Inoki after the match, was edited out on television to only include one man, Ali, and Inoki coming face to face in the ring where they had their infamous, but legendary mixed match. Ali had to be helped into the ring, in some ways appearing even more aged than a 90-year-old Sam Mushnick, and in every way appearing more aged than an 81-year-old Lou Thesz at the WWF pay-per-view show last October in St. Louis. If there was any solace to Ali's appearance, coming face to face with another person that he put on the world map, when he was in the ring, he at least seemed cognizant enough when close to Inoki to recognize him as a friend, to at least break a smile of recognition, even if he couldn't actually talk with him, for at least a momentary break in an otherwise blank face. The fact that Inoki has remarkably not physically aged over the past 20 years only heightened the contrast. Those scenes totally overpower the samurai drama scenes where a young actor played Inoki at 5, Inoki in his teens, Inoki practicing the shot put in the fields of Brazil, an actor who from a distance had a remarkable resemblance to the late Ric Flair, portraying Ric Flair coming to Brazil to find the Japanese native that had become a high school track champion in Brazil, and Inoki dealing with the death of his third surrogate father after Ric Flair's famous death. The wrestling clips were more interesting. Inoki's final match against Fry was acceptable, but hardly the stuff legends are made of. It only went 4:09, which was way too short. Since even against men with no previous working experience, Inoki often had long matches in his famous mixed martial arts matches of the late 70s. But the reality is that this Inoki is 55 years old, whether he looked it or not. It was acceptable to a crowd that, with the advent of UFC and Vale Tudo, understands real fights often and quickly. For their part, both Inoki and Fry did a good job in the short time out there of working a shoot that could pass for being real, at least until the finish. More than 99% of all pro wrestling matches. Fry's performance had to earn tremendous points for how well within the framework of what they were trying to portray he sold for Inoki's final comeback. Earlier in the show, Fry was given angles with Gerard Gordeau, the famed karate star from Holland, and Satoru Sayama, to come out of doing the clean job with minimal damage. A few days later, Inoki and protege Naoya Ogawa were at the first K1 show of 1998 at the Yokohama Arena on April 9. Inoki made a pre-match presentation to Ernesto Hoost and Peter Aerts, who fought in the main event with Aerts winning via a majority decision, while Ogawa presented a post-match trophy to Hug, who defeated Curtis Schuster by a unanimous decision in the semifinal. Both scenes were edited off the television show since it aired on Fuji Network, a rival to TV Asahi that broadcasted the Inoki special. After the show, Inoki left for Los Angeles where his new UFO promotion will be based. Inoki will have a retirement party on April 27 at the Zeniku Hotel in Tokyo, where he will also give more details about his new promotion, which is rumored to be debuting in October with a show at an 80,000-seat soccer stadium in India, which will be the pro wrestling debut of former world judo champion Rafael Kubatuki of Holland, who was a rival of Ogawa's in their judo days with each winning one match. While the New Japan Company, largely through Inoki and Choshu's retirement shows, has done record business over the first few months of this year, those were the ultimate hotshot angles, and now the company has to go back to the reality of a soft wrestling business with little in the way of fresh matchups and angles on the horizon. While Inoki and Choshu hadn't really been in key positions as drawing cards over the past several years, although Choshu did give himself one strong run that did phenomenal business on some big shows over the last 18 months leading to his retirement, they were there for the mainstream fans on the big shows. The New Japan specialty. Keiji Muto's knee operation, which took place on April 13, takes one more of the three remaining biggest draws in the company out of picture until the summer. Recognizing that coming back from Inoki's retirement quickly would be almost impossible, the May 3 Osaka Dome show was moved to August 8. New Japan's next focus will be the annual Super Junior tournament from May 16 to June 5, ending at Budokan Hall. The 12-man tournament will be broken down into two groups, each having 5 round-robin matches. The 2 wrestlers with the best record coming out of their groups will meet in the championship match. The groups haven't been announced yet, but 11 of the 12 names involved have: Jushin Liger, El Samurai, the defending champion Koji Kanemoto, who had the match of his lifetime losing in the finals last year, Shinjiro Otani, Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Kendo Kashin, Dr. Wagner Jr. Felino, Yuji Yasurioka, Masakazu Fukuda, Shiryu, WCW's Kaz Hayashi, and one more name to be announced. The company also released its schedule for the rest of the year, which one can draw the conclusion the company realizes that after blowing its wad early in the year, combined with the weak overall wrestling industry in the country, that it has to be less ambitious than in past years. The tour following the Juniors Tour will be June 24th to July 15th, with the biggest shows being a 2-night stand on July 14th and July 15th at Sapporo's Nakajima Sports Center. That will be followed by the annual G1 Climax tournament with 3 shows, July 31st, August 1st and August 2nd all at Tokyo Sumo Hall, and the August 8th Osaka Dome show, which is expected to be headlined by a New Japan vs. K1 interpromotional match. The September tour, traditionally one of the biggest of the year, will be September 10th to September 23rd with big shows on September 19th in Nagoya, September 21st in Osaka and September 23rd at the Yokohama Arena. The October tour will be October 9th to October 30th with the biggest shows on October 18th in Kobe, October 24th in Fukuoka and October 30th in Hiroshima. The final tour will be November 26th to December 6th with the biggest shows on December 4th in Osaka and December 6th in Nagoya. As this shows, not only was the Fukuoka Dome show cancelled, but so was the Nagoya Dome show, and after G1 cut down to only 3 shows, it had been in past years as many as 7 straight nights at Sumo Hall. There is only one major show for the rest of the year in the Tokyo area, being the September 23rd Yokohama Arena show. Japanese television rundown. March 28, New Japan. 1. Igor Mindert beat Kazuyuki Fujita in 6:33 when the ref stopped the match due to Mindert pounding on Fujita. This was similar to a rings opener a few years ago where you have a Japanese wrestler who knows how to work the style putting over a big clueless European. Fujita was real good, while Meindert looked bad since he was trying to work shoot style and wasn't experienced at it and really didn't get over in the process. 1 star. 2. Brian Johnston beat Yoshiaki Fujiwara in 7:49 when the ref stopped the match after Johnston was throwing a series of unanswered punches straight down while on top of him. Johnston has potential in that his selling of Fujiwara's moves was really good. He moved well on the ground but really didn't show any charisma. The problem with his standing, which most of the match was, is that he was holding back so much on his punches and kicks that it was obvious he was working, which isn't what a mixed match or any kind of good pro wrestling match is supposed to look like. 1/2 of 1 star. 3. Don Frye beat Kazuo Yamazaki in 5:11. Frye is an awesome heel and Yamazaki is the perfect type of opponent to carry him. Yamazaki jumped him at the bell and the crowd was into this match from start to finish. Frye knocked him down, but instead of letting the ref count, continued to punch and slap him. Frye also wouldn't break a choke on the ropes. Yamazaki was making a big comeback when Frye punched him with a foreign object to get the knockout and Yamazaki did a stretcher job. Not quite as good as their previous match. 2 1/4 stars. 4. Naoya Ogawa beat Dave Beneteau with an armbar in 5:15. Really boring. Dud. 5. Antonio Inoki had a 5 minutes exhibition with K1 fighter Nobuaki Tsunoda. Inoki looked absolutely incredible for 55 years old. Wonder what he's doing besides dyeing his hair. It looks like a 30-year-old fitness freak in that he's really cut up and doesn't carry a lot of muscular bulk on his frame, but is very muscular for his age and moves well. Maybe Thez was quicker at the same age and Bockwinkel was a better worker at that age. But there haven't been many. March 29th, All Japan. 1. Akira Tao pinned Giant Kimala 2 with a choke slam in 9:41. Uck. Dud. 2. Williams and Hockfield and Smith beat Misawa and Akiyama and Asako in 2015. Only the last 6 minutes aired on television, but it was good, particularly Misawa versus Williams, although Smith and Akiyama weren't far behind. Several good near falls ending when Hockfield pinned Asako after an helicopter. 3 stars. 3. Hansen pinned Albright with a sloppy lariat out of nowhere in 10:59. Nothing to this match besides Albright's suplexes. Very little heat. Hansen really needs to be kept in the middle of the card where he can be a legend making cameos, rather than being put over the current stars as he looks really bad in that position. Negative 1/2 of 1 star. Mexico. As it turns out, Pierre Roth Jr. didn't jump nor has Tarzan Boy left Azteca, as both worked on April 10th at the television tapings before a sellout 2,500 fans at Eduardo Molina. Supposedly Pierre Roth Jr. never had any plans of leaving, but had received an offer to jump back. The plans are to build up a match over the summer with Pierre Roth Jr. versus La Parka Mask versus Mask, which would probably be the highest profile match of the year in Mexico. Pierre Roth Jr. will be working Sundays for EMLL at Arena Coliseo, but will be part of the EMLL versus Azteca feud they're running. Some of the WCW talent was back working the tapings, as the top matches were Conan and Parka and Tarzan Boy versus Pierre Roth and Silver King and Pirata Morgan, Salsero and Torero and Zorro versus Dandy and Pantera del Ring, El Texano and Oro Jr. and Super Calo and Mega Electra versus Mosco de la Merced and El Hijo del Diablo and Brazo de Platino. At Arena Mexico on April 10th it was Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Atlantis and Emilio Charles Jr., who is getting the big push as top babyface, versus Cien Caras and Mascara Año 2000 and Universo 2000, Headhunters, as faces, and Brazo de Oro versus El Satanico and Gran Marcus Jr. and Apollo Dantes and Pantera and Olympus and Tony Rivera versus Bestia Salvaje and Violencia and Black Warrior. The top 2 matches sound just atrocious. AAA had major weekend shows on April 10th in Mexico City and April 11th in Acapulco, largely built around Pentagon versus Abismo Negro main events. In Acapulco, Pentagon was defending the Mexican national middleweight title, and there is a good chance the title switched. The Brennan brothers, the TV stars who drew huge crowds for their previous wrestling matches and got all the pub doing the angle where Abismo Negro gave one of them the tombstone and he did a stretcher job, were to return to do a concert on the show and probably do some sort of angle back in the main event. In Tijuana on April 10th in a tag match with Rey Mysterio and Kiss and Super Muñeco against Psicosis and Damien and Phobia, it wound up with Damien turning on Psicosis and Halloween coming out in a brawl to start a new local feud with Psicosis and Phobia, who is Psicosis' younger brother, against Damien and Halloween. All Japan. We're already seeing the other end of all those classic matches, whether they be from Shawn Michaels or Mitsuharu Misawa and the top stars here as they get a little older. Misawa, who turns 36 in June, has been wrestling at a high level, either amateur or pro, for basically his entire life. This includes an early career in Mexico where he used the name Kamikaze for his inventive high-risk moves, which are actually nothing in comparison to what the early 20s flyers in Mexico are doing nowadays. This was followed by his early career in Japan as the second Tiger Mask, the best flying wrestler in the world of his day. And since 1990, as an all-Japan headliner, he's adopting the more physical, grueling, serious style as arguably the best wrestler of the decade. He's also breaking down completely, and as the top star and top draw in the company, a company with a mentality that you simply don't miss matches, leading up to the biggest match of his lifetime, he's never been in worse condition. Besides the broken finger and serious back and neck injuries he's been working on April 6th, while taking an ace crusher from Johnny Ace, he landed wrong and suffered a broken left kneecap. He continued on tour and wrestled every night until seeing a doctor on April 10th in Tokyo who recommended surgery and told him he had to take 6 weeks off, which would of course not only cause him to miss the rest of the Champion Carnival tour that he's heavily figured into the finals of, but even more importantly, the May 1st Tokyo Dome show. Of course he's still wrestling every night. Akira Tao, who blew out his left knee on March 28th and was supposed to be out until the Dome show, returned on the April 11th Korakuen Hall show as apparently there are some wins he needs to get so the Carnival Finals workout is scheduled, not to mention the mentality here that you don't miss work. Actually, he lost both his key matches since his return to Kawada and Hansen, and his matches have been kept short. Standings as of April 14th in the Carnival, which ends on April 16th, and all wrestlers will end with 12 matches, so you can figure from this how many matches everyone has left. 1. Steve Williams 7-2-0. 2. Stan Hansen 8-2-1 and Mitsuharu Misawa 7-1-3. 4. Jun Akiyama 8-2-2. 5. Kenta Kobashi 6-2-2 and Toshiaki Kawada 6-2-2. 7. Johnny Ace 4-2-2. 8. Gary Albright 4-5-0. 9. Akira Tao 4-6-0. 10. Wolf Hockfield 2-7-0. 11. Giant Kimala 2-8-0. 12. Takao Omori 1-8-0. 13. Jun Izumida 0-8-0. So with a few days left they've got 6 guys still mathematically very much alive. Amazing how that works. Misawa's last match left is April 15th against Hockfield, so that's an almost guaranteed win. Hansen vs. Kobashi takes place on April 16th while Kawada meets Albright on April 15th. From this week, April 8th in Sasebo before 1700 had Kimala 2-pin Hockfield in 1134 with a flying clothesline, Akiyama pin Izumida in 1710 with a high knee, Ace pin Albright in 948 with a Cobra Clutch suplex, and Misawa and Hansen go to a 30-minute draw. April 11th at Tokyo Korakuen Hall before a sellout 2100 had Tao pin Izumida in 546 with a choke slam, Ace pin Hockfield in 1257 with the Ace Crusher, Williams pinned Albright in 1004 with the Dr. Bomb, and Kobashi went to a 30-minute draw with Akiyama. April 12th in Sendai before a sellout 3650 had Hansen pin Kimala 2 in 410 with a lariat, Kobashi pinned Izumida in 1229 with a lariat, Akiyama pinned Ace in 1113 with the exploder, Misawa pinned Williams in 1822 with a spinning elbow, and Kawada made Tao submit in 917 to the figure 4 leg lock, making sense since Tao was working the match on a blown-out knee. April 13th in Ichiniseki before 1400 saw Ace pinning Izumida in 1056 with the Cobra Clutch suplex, Akiyama pinned Hockfield in 1242 with the exploder, Misawa pinned Kimala 2 with a spinning elbow, and Hansen pinned Tao in 613 with a lariat. After the Carnival Final and the Dome show, the next major card will be June 12th at Budokan Hall. March 29th TV did a 3.9 rating. New Japan. The new tour, largely built around Genichiro Tenryu joining Heisei Shingun in the main events, opened on April 13th in Saga before just 1,350 as Tenryu and Shiro Koshinaka beat Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan on top. The only foreigner on the tour is Big Titan. They are doing the Norio Onaga retirement show on April 30th at Korakuen Hall. A correction from last week's notes about Inoki's famous matches. The referee for the Inoki vs. Tatsumi Fujinami 60 minutes draw on August 8, 1988 was Pete Takahashi. Luthez was the referee of an Inoki vs. Fujinami singles match in 1985. Yuji Yasurioka suffered some sort of a shoulder injury on the first night. Yasurioka is working this tour, but is also scheduled to work the War show on April 26 at Korakuen Hall in the main event against Nobutaka Araya. War is running 5 independent dates between May 24 and June 30. March 28 TV did a 2.6 rating. Other Japan notes. The first K1 event of 1998, on April 9 at the Yokohama Arena, drew a sellout 16,000 fans. It was different from the usual K1 event because it lacked the spectacular knockouts. Only one televised match, it aired from 9 to 11 p.m. on tape delay later that night on Fuji Network. At press time we don't know the rating, ended with a knockout, that being Mike Bernardo winning the Wako Pro World Muay Thai Super Heavyweight title from Gordon Miners of England in 2:05 of the second round with a right-left combination. Maurice Smith returned to K1 going to a 5-round draw with Masaki Sadake. Nobuhiko Takada was the only pro wrestler at the show who was featured on television, presenting flowers in the ring to Sadake after the match. Sadake is getting a big push since promoter Kazuyoshi Ishii is looking at putting him in some mixed matches later this year, perhaps against either Naoya Ogawa or as Akira Maida's retirement opponent, since Maida's pick for his last foe, Alexander Karelin, is going to be next to impossible to pull off. Sadake in 1992, before K1 debuted in 1993, worked for Rings as the number 2 star for the group behind Maida, but the two never did a singles match. The show also featured the debut of Jen the Giant Norkia, a 22-year-old from South Africa billed as the largest kickboxer in history at 6'11", 285 pounds. But he was knocked out early. They flew in an English-language broadcast team for this show, so it'll air somewhere in some form in the United States. The proposed K1 debut show in Las Vegas was moved from August 8 to August 7, I'm assuming because they want it to be a pay-per-view show and because WCW already has August 8 reserved for its annual disaster of a show called Road Wild. FMW announced the complete show for its April 30 pay-per-view from Yokohama Bunka Gym. They are copying the Mike Tyson angle as Jiro Watanabe, 43, who was probably the most famous boxer in Japan in the early 80s when he was WBA Junior Bantamweight Champion, WBC Bantamweight Champion, and then WBA Bantamweight Champion, unifying the WBC and WBA belts, which were the two major organizations at the time. Finishing with a 26-2 career record, will work the show as the outside-the-ring referee in the main event, which will be Mr. Ganasuke defending the Independent World Heavyweight and World Brass Knucks belt against Hayabusa. The rest of the show will be Atsushi Onita versus Hiromichi Fuyuki in a lumberjack match with the Weird Stips, Bam Bam Bigelow versus Masato Tanaka, Tetsuhiro Kuroda and the Gladiator versus Horace Boulder and Super Leather, Jinsei Shinzaki versus Yukihiro Kanemura, Riki Fuji and John Cronus versus Geto and Jado. A 3-way dance with Koji Nakagawa, Hisakatsu Oya and Chris Chetty and Hideki Hasaka versus Haido. Bigelow's other appearance on April 29 in Nagoya will be a singles match against Leather on a show headlined by Hayabusa and Shinzaki and Fuji versus Ganasuke and Geto and Jado, while Cronus faces Tanaka. Dynamite Kansai of JWP on the April 12 Korakuen Hall show issued a challenge to Shinobu Kandori for the WWWA title. All Japan Women was down to less than 1,000 at Korakuen Hall on April 12 for a match for the vacant WWWA tag titles as the Masked Zaps, who were called I, Kaoru Ito, and T. Tomoka Watanabe, beat Kumiko Maekawa and Takako Inoue in 25:08 when T pinned Inoue with a screwdriver. This sets T up to challenge Inoue for the All-Pacific title on April 21 in Osaka, while I has a single match against Manami Toyota on the May 5 Korakuen Hall show. Also on the April 12 Korakuen Hall show, Momoe Nakanishi won the All Japan singles title beating Emi Motokawa. Shinji Ueda, 70, who has been the commissioner for AJW since seemingly forever, announced that he will retire on May 31. Urgent on May 5 will have a one-night UFC-style 8-woman tournament with first-round matches of Yumi Fukawa versus Candy Akutsu, Richimata versus Michiko Omukai, Mariko Yoshida versus Mikiko Futagami and Asia Kong versus Reggie Bennett. I haven't seen Urgent yet, but apparently they try to work a Pancrase style. They are talking about putting on a martial arts show in December, bringing back Svetlana Bondarenko, the 6'3", 315-pound Russian who took the silver medal in the 1988 Olympics in judo and later won the L1 tournament, a shoot UFC-style event for women. Thrashing everyone including Kandori in the finals, a new independent promotion called Independent Wrestlers, which will include Tarzan Goto, Gran Hamada, Masashi Aoyagi, Goro Tsurumi, Shigeo Okamura, Masao Orihara and Ryuma Go has a show on May 21 at Korakuen Hall. In Valley Tudo matches, Added to the April 26th Yokohama Arena shootboxing show are Akira Gono vs. Matt Rocca, a former Lions Den student, and Ruben Asado vs. Michael Buell, former USWF lightweight champion, underneath the Tatsuo Nakano vs. Emmanuel Yarbrough headliner. Big Japan, which recently did a match with cactus bushes in all four corners, is doing a 13-gimmick match on May 1st in Toto with Jason the Terrible and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga and Shoji Nakamaki vs. Great Pogo and Shadow Winger and Shadow WX with barbed wire boards, dry ice, beds of nails and a bunch of other crap. Here and there. MPPW Memphis Power Pro will run its first house show besides the weekly Thursday night casino dates on April 25th in Crenshaw, Mississippi with Jerry Lawler vs. Austin Idol and Buddy Landell vs. Bill Dundee. Sid Vicious won't be working for the group as he had minor falling outs with both Lawler and Randy Hales. Sid had an idea about using a 6'10" African-American from Memphis who has apparently a big rep around town as a local bouncer, and bringing him out in chains. Hales felt that something like that could cause them to lose television, and Sid also wanted to book the territory. There was also a minor situation where there was a week where Lawler and Christopher were both going to miss a Thursday night casino show because of WWF commitments, and they asked Sid to headline, which he agreed to but then canceled 2 days before the show and instead worked for Doug Gilbert in Blytheville, Arkansas, and there is heat between Lawler and Gilbert, but he no-showed the date to work for Doug Gilbert. T.C. Martin's NWC ran on April 4th in Sacramento, California, doing an angle to set up the pro wrestling debut of Steve Sachs, the former Los Angeles Dodgers star. Sachs refereed the match with Jake Roberts vs. Honky Tonk Man, which wound up in a post-match attack by Greg Valentine to set up Jake and Sachs vs. the former Rhythm and Blues on June 26th in Sacramento, which will also include a Sabu vs. Terry Funk match. Martin released an attendance figure of 1,840 on the internet, but the real number was 682, paying $11,000. Bill Behrens has agreed to buy full control in Music City Wrestling in payments over the next 6 months. Behrens, who may have one minor partner in executing the buyout, owned 25% of the company while Burt Prentice owned the other 75%. Theoretically, Prentice will continue for at least 6 months after that point as general manager of the group. Really, that 75-25 split was never really a paper deal, as Behrens was handling the syndication end and Prentice the live promotions end. Behrens wants to open up Chattanooga and Knoxville, to add to Nashville and Louisville. The career of Adrian Street may have come to an end this weekend. Street, who was a huge name in the British wrestling scene in the 70s, doing a Goldust gimmick a generation before it ever came to this country, and then worked in the 80s in many territories such as Los Angeles, Florida, Carolinas, Mid-South, Southeast and Southwest before moving to Gulf Breeze, Florida and opening up a wrestling school. Wrestled on April 10th in Sidenell, Alabama against student Al Savage, and when Savage executed a flying cross-body block, Streets didn't have his footing and all his knee tendons were shot and his kneecap dislocated. He had major surgery the next day and the doctor said the recovery period would be 12 to 18 months. Since Street is nearing 60, this may be the end of his career. During his career in the States, Street, who was accompanied by wife Linda, did have memorable comedic feuds with the likes of Dusty Rhodes and Jimmy Valiant. This is actually old news, but we didn't hear of it until this week. Ignacio Pedro Martinez, best known for promoting the old National Wrestling Federation out of Buffalo and Cleveland, the group that was sold in the 1970s to Antonio Inoki, and later worked with Eddie Einhorn in a failed attempt to promote nationally, taking on the big boys of the NWA and WWF in the mid-70s, passed away on February 4th, which was 2 days shy of his 83rd birthday from stomach cancer and several strokes. He also promoted shows in Nigeria and South America. He helped start out wrestlers like Elio DiPaolo, Buffalo's most famous local wrestler who was Martinez's son-in-law, Fritz Von Erich and Dick Destroyer Bear. In 1975, after selling his regional promotion, he joined with Einhorn to start a rival promotion using Mil Mascaras as world champion with names like Ernie Ladd, Bulldog Brower, Ivan Koloff, the Love Brothers, the Kangaroos, and even Luthez. Their first major show in the New York market at Roosevelt Stadium in New Jersey drew 15,000 fans with Mascaras vs. Koloff on top, but soon most of the big names returned to the major federations when it became clear this venture wasn't making it due to an inability to book the best arenas, and the fierce competition as the existing promotions would often put on major shows, getting outside talent such as Andre the Giant for help in the same cities. The group ended up in the Carolinas as a minor league office with Brower as the top star after most of the big stars had left, before closing completely around 1977. Martinez moved to Florida and started the Prime Minister Film and Videotape Company, selling videos of both his shows and of other classic era wrestling matches. Henry Marcus, the longtime wrestling promoter in Charleston, South Carolina, is going to have a wrestling tribute show for him on May 30th at King Street Plaza, formerly County Hall, where he promoted weekly wrestling shows. Among the wrestlers expected to attend are Johnny Valentine, Wahoo McDaniel, who has been recently in poor health due to kidney failure and is on dialysis, Ole Anderson, Dory Funk, Tully Blanchard, Nikita Koloff, George, and Sandy Scott, Rip Hawk, Swede Hansen, Tim Mr. Wrestling Woods, Nick Bockwinkel, Nelson Royal, Ron Garvin, Abe Jacobs, Hiro Matsuda, Grizzly Smith, Jose Lothario, George Harris, Fabulous Moolah, Penny Banner, Ronnie West, and Tommy Young. Marcus, 86, retired as a promoter in 1989. Michael Modest, who is the top star for All Pro Wrestling in Northern California, suffered a torn bicep doing a furniture moving gig. That'll slow up plans for him to try and rework his physique by the time WCW returns to California in July. April 24th in Mount Holly, New Jersey at the National Guard Armory on Route 38 has Sid vs. Ahmed Johnson and Pit Bulls vs. Misfits plus Marlena, Doug Gilbert, and King Mabel. April 26th in Garfield, New Jersey at the Boys and Girls Club has Sid vs. Mabel, Gilbert vs. Lance Diamond plus Marlena. Border City Wrestling on May 29th in LaSalle, ONT at Centennial Arena has Scott D'Amore vs. Rocky Maivia, Larry Brune vs. D'Lo Brown and Brooklyn Brawler against Canadian Football League All-Star Chris Church. For more info call 519-734-1312. Action Jackson vs. Rod Price will be the final match for the Texas heavyweight title for the new NWA Southwest promotion on April 24th in Dallas. The winner of that match faces Dan Severn on May 8th. Blast from the past. S.D. Jones, Conrad Efron, a longtime WWF jobber, who by our records would be 52 years old, is scheduled to reform his tag team with Tony Atlas on an Eastern Wrestling Association show on April 18th in Lewiston, Maine. Northeast Wrestling on April 25th in Washington, Connecticut at Shepaug Valley High School has Sid Vicious vs. Ahmed Johnson plus King Kong Bundy, FBI and Supernova. Nasty Boy Promotions, run by Brian Knobs, has a show on April 29th in Titusville, Florida billed as WCW and WWF Greatest Superstars featuring Knobs, Jim Duggan, who lives in Titusville, Florida and may be only making a guest appearance and not wrestling on the show, Tatanka, Greg Valentine, Bushwhackers, Brett Sawyer, now using the ring name Mad Dog Brett Sawyer, I guess to confuse people into thinking he's his more famous late older brother, Sherry Martel and Typhoon. Independent Wrestling World on May 9th in Hanover, Germany has Ian Rotten vs. Cannonball Grizzly on top plus Ulf Herman, Franz Schumann, Michael Kovac, Tony St. Clair and American Indies Billy Joe Eaton and Colonel Blatnick from the Milwaukee area. Jake Roberts is said to be working on an autobiography. Mike Shaw, Norman the Lunatic, Makan Singh, Bastion Booger, is opening a wrestling school in Scandia, Michigan. For more info you can call 906-942-7255. A group called Can-Am Wrestling Federation is now running every Tuesday in Calgary at Backstreet Bar and bi-weekly in Edmonton with former Stampede wrestlers Cuban Assassin, Beef Wellington and Ken Johnson as headliners. They also have a Hart family rep, Teddy Hart, real name Ted Annis, but his mother is Georgia Hart, who is one of the kids who trained with Davy Boy Smith's son Harry. His younger brother was the one who passed away in 1996. National Championship Wrestling on May 16th in Red Lion, Pennsylvania at the Fairmont Arena has Honky Tonk Man and a jet black-haired Missy Hyatt. NHB, there's nothing definitive about the May 15th show as a lot of different ideas are being batted around, largely involving every combination of Mark Coleman, Vitor Belfort, Tsuyoshi Kosaka, and Gary Goodridge. There was a report from Japan that Akira Maeda had pulled Kosaka from the show because the ring's date in May was too close in proximity, but from what we understand, that isn't a definite as Kosaka is still being considered for the show. It now appears Randy Couture will only be out of action for about 2 months, but the plan is to use Frank Shamrock as the main event in July, which means Couture's title defense, which theoretically would be against Coleman provided he doesn't get knocked off before then, wouldn't be until September. They've added a match with Andre Roberts, a 385-pounder who has been competing in Extreme Challenge, against 290-pound Harry Moskowitz, who looked unimpressive losing via decision to a guy he outweighed by 80 pounds in a UFC Alternates match in 1997, to the pay-per-view. Brad Kohler, who was in the Japanese pay-per-view and has been doing pro wrestling of late in Minneapolis, and in real life has been the recent training partner of Sean Waltman, blew out his knee in the first round of a April 11th Extreme Challenge tournament in Indianapolis. Kohler shot in on Paul Pumphrey and his knee went out, causing the match to end in just 6 seconds. He suffered torn right knee ligaments and will be undergoing surgery. Frank Shamrock was in New York last week doing commentary for the Strikeforce show on ESPN2 on a couple of sport jiu-jitsu matches. He's also doing commentary for the next Draka show at the Forum in Los Angeles on May 24th, which will include Maurice Smith versus John Claude of K1 fame and the return to fighting of former UFC announcer Don Wilson. Both K1 and Draka will have presentations before the Nevada State Athletic Commission on April 22nd. UFC isn't going to be part of that, but is now planning on doing a presentation in the late summer. ECW. The weekend shows drew 1,974 on April 9th in Fort Lauderdale, 1,600 on April 10th in Tampa, and a sellout 1,142 on April 11th in Kissimmee, Florida. Working the weekend were Sam Fatu, twin brother of the wrestler generally known as Fatu and Sultan, who put over Mikey Whipwreck Sabu, and Bobby Duncombe Jr., and the Bushwhackers known as the Bushwhackin' Dudleys, who were used mainly for angle distraction. Fatu was a weekend tryout and it doesn't appear he's going to be brought in and didn't get over, while Bushwhackers were just a weekend deal. They redid the Taz Shane Douglas angle with them, saying Taz nearly broke Douglas' arm last week and Douglas basically dared him to try it again, but if he took him down, Bigelow would jump on him, which is pretty well how it went with him now, saying Douglas has an injured arm although he is still going to wrestle Sabu on April 18th in Philadelphia. Sandman and Devon Dudley were also injured over the weekend. In the case of Sandman, not sure what is and isn't legit. He worked the first night of the tour mainly to do an angle where he and Tommy Dreamer got thrashed with cane and chair shot by the Dudleys to set up their pay-per-view match. He took a Dudley death drop, basically a diamond cutter. They acted as if he had a severe injury and he's all banged up anyway. He did jam his neck and taking the bump, although there are reports the neck injury was more serious and could be a pinched nerve. He didn't work the rest of the weekend, although that was due to being suspended along with Sabu, who only worked April 11th to do a TV angle where he had Fatu beat, but Rob Van Dam jumped in dressed as Sabu and got the pin. Apparently there was an incident a few weeks back at the Pittsburgh Plaza Hotel in which rooms registered to Thomas Couch, Tommy Rogers, James Fullington, Sandman, John Marks, Ref Pee Wee Moore, Tracy Smothers and Terry Brunk Sabu were all thrashed. Basically ECW is now banned from the hotel. Incidents like that, while not a regular occurrence, were also not uncommon from ECW a few years back, but since the company is higher profile, Paul Heyman has to take more seriously things like this. According to Heyman, Sabu and Sandman took the heat for the incident, paid for the damage and were both suspended for the weekend but transported themselves in without getting paid in order to do the angles. A correction from last week when it comes to the advance for the Marietta, Georgia show on May 3rd. The actual advance as of press time was about 1,900 tickets and $60,000 in a building that will be set up for 3,200. Devon Dudley was also injured over the weekend, taking a nut shot a little too hard from New Jack. Beulah missed both this weekend and last over personal problems, but is expected to work the April 18th Philadelphia show and the pay-per-view show. The Van Dam Bigelow match aired on TV this past week from Buffalo. It was the best ECW match in a long time. This hasn't been exactly the best year, whether it be US or Japan, for exceptional matches. In fact, it's been among the worst because Japan is just as stale and US wrestling has become more Jerry Springer in WWF and just a vehicle for Hogan in WCW. So saying it is among the best matches of the year in the US is true, but I wouldn't call it match of the year either. Van Dam's stuff looked real good and the heat was excellent. Bigelow did a great job with him. Van Dam's 2 dives were top-level lucha caliber. I'd give it 3 3/4 stars because the finish was too hokey, as the ref bump was one of those real embarrassing ones. 2 Cold Scorpio did a job for Bigelow in just a few seconds in Kissimmee to set up Bigelow and Taz brawling all over the place. ECW TV in the Boston market has been moved to Saturday nights at 12:30 a.m. on Voonie Channel 27 out of Worcester. Reckless Youth made debut here this weekend. WCW. Randy Savage is going to work the pay-per-view on April 19th against Sting in the WCW title match. Nitro on April 13th in Minneapolis drew a sellout 16,827, 14,774, paying $279,028 for what was largely another in the run of so-so shows. Scott Steiner beat David Finlay in 3:03 with the recliner. Steiner was yelling at Larry Hennig at ringside during the match, which made all kinds of sense considering Larry's son is in the NWO. Ultimo Dragon beat Lenny Lane in 5:13 with the Dragon Sleeper. It was probably the best Lane has looked in WCW, which is a credit to Dragon. They did the interview that was actually taped on April 6th, where Roddy Piper was being interviewed backstage, and he was jumped by Hulk Hogan and Ed Leslie, and Leslie dropped him in the hallway with probably the worst-looking Stone Cold Stunner in history. Piper had announced a TV main event of Hogan vs. Nash. Hogan, Piper, and Leslie weren't even in Minneapolis as Hogan was doing Jay Leno. It was really stupid in a sense because Gene Okerlund was wearing a different tie in the interview than in his next interview right after the commercial break, and later in the show they said Hogan was flying to Los Angeles to do Leno, and anyone who has ever seen Leno knows that the show is taped at 5:30 p.m. Johnny Grunge pinned Chavo Guerrero Jr. Eddie wasn't there, in 2:33. Try to make sense out of that one. Kevin Nash did an interview, trying to get back at Piper for the line about he and Hogan being lovers, which I guess he didn't take kindly to. So he said some line about Piper being buddies with George Michael that didn't get over because he botched the line. I'm sure the idea was funny beforehand. He said Hogan had snuck out the back door and was gone when he heard he had to wrestle him, so he was challenging Sting. Sting came out, spoke a whole bunch of words, gave Nash the bat and accepted the challenge and told J.J. Dillon that he wanted the powerbomb legal in the match so Nash would have no excuses. Chris Benoit beat Glacier with a crossface in 4:21. Solid. Lex Luger beat Marcus Bagwell via DQ in 5:53 when Bischoff kept kicking Luger as he had Bagwell in the rack. Luger then racked Bischoff until Scott Steiner came out, and then Rick Steiner made the save. Chris Jericho kept the Cruiserweight title, beating Super Calo in 5:04 of a good match. Jericho was hilarious, claiming it wasn't really Calo under the mask but Prince Nakamaki. Then Calo tried to unmask and show the ref it was really him. He said in Spanish that he wasn't Iaukea, but Jericho did the translating, and it was hilarious again. Iaukea did the run-in afterwards, and Jericho claimed the guy who did the run-in was Nakamaki's twin brother. Perry Saturn beat Hammer in 3:18 with the rings. No heat at all, but considering it was a Hammer match, Saturn did a good job. Bill Goldberg destroyed Rocco Rock by tackling him through a table and jackhammering him in 2:40. Goldberg totally brought the house down. Kurt Hennig beat Yuji Nagata with a fisherman suplex in 2:51. After the first high spot, Hennig couldn't even get heat in his hometown, which was amazing. Larry Hennig and Dick Rude, Rick's father, were sitting together at ringside. Kurt held Nagata for Larry to take a shot, but instead Larry just took off his shirt, revealing another Hennig shirt. They handcuffed Nagata to the ropes and destroyed him while Sonny Ono was dialing out for pizza, until Jim Neidhart made the save. Booker T pinned La Parka with a drop kick off the top in 3:27 to keep the TV strap. T did his cool moves, but it wasn't as good a match as you'd think because Parka didn't get any offense in. After the match, Parka went for the chair shot, but Benoit saved T, and the two guys shoved each other. Diamond Dallas Page pinned Rage in 3:01 with the Diamond Cutter. Rage has a lot of potential. Raven's flock came out, but Page hit a pescado on them. Raven began cutting a promo and he got flattened, second show in a row, by a fan who hopped the rail and nailed him after getting a running head start. The fan then got flattened by the Dillinger Gang. Rick Steiner beat Conan in 3:33 with a bulldog off the top. Ted DiBiase attacked Vincent. Main event with Sting vs. Nash had a screw job finish, but at least it was a different and an exciting version of one. Elizabeth distracted the ref and Savage clocked Sting with his cast and Nash covered him, but Sting kicked out. At this point the fans started throwing the garbage from everywhere. Nash hit the power bomb and went for the pin, but at the count of 2, Bret Hart pulled the ref out of the ring. Hart got the Scorpion on Nash while the NWOB team showed up to bump like crazy for him. There were really too many, and it looked even sillier than it used to with Sting as they were all standing there waiting to get tagged. They did in-studio interviews with Hart that were shown throughout the show to build for him coming out at the end. At least they're positioning him with the A-Team. Segments were good, and they also allowed him to close the book on television about the Survivor Series. Probably the biggest story of the show live, which never aired on television, was the appearance of Jesse Ventura, who was running for governor. Ventura was never mentioned on television, although there were banners for him all over the place. He was all over the building glad-handing people, and there were loud chants for him throughout the show. He brought a camera crew with him, and there were arguments with WCW personnel about that. Rick Martel is now expected back in another 3 months. Hector Garza had his knee reconstructive surgery on April 6th and probably won't be back until around October. No update on Savage. The belief is he'll undergo surgery after the pay-per-view, and then they'll find out at that time how severe the damage is. Rolling Stone magazine did a bit on the Page/Raven angle on MTV and shooed them together. Even though Davey Boy Smith injured his knee on April 6th, He was back in Tallahassee doing a run-in and is expected to wrestle Curt Hennig on the pay-per-view. Thunder on April 9th in Tallahassee drew 7,247, paying $146,215. It also did a 3.9 rating and 6.3 share on the live show and 1.4 rating and 4.5 share on the replay. Just 2 more hours of TV. Flair was advertised like crazy in the market and fans were real unhappy about him not being there. Saturn beat Tokyo Magnum in 124 with the rings. Figures they find a guy who has great potential out of the blue, and not saying he should win or be pushed, but at least they should give him time to do some stuff. Aokiya beat Nagata with the Northern Lights suplex in 5:22. They were missing stuff left and right. Prince sprained his knee during the match, but it wasn't serious. Jericho ran in and said Prince was way too fat to be a cruiserweight. It was hilarious. Raven did an interview and was about to tell that Page got his break because he was living next door to Bischoff when a fan hopped the rail, grabbed him by the hair and dragged him out of the ring. He got back in and kept doing his promo, but was all flustered. The mic wasn't working and he kept talking. The entire segment was screwed up. Bagwell did an interview. Tony Schiavone seemed totally disinterested, which killed the segment, although Bagwell's interview wasn't much either. Benoit beat Conan with a crossface in 3:18. Sometimes I can't figure out what mind-blocking devices some of the announcers in this business take before they go out. Prince used a Northern Lights suplex to win, although Mike Tenay had to call the spot. Then Benoit used the same move in this match and Tenay wasn't out there and nobody had a clue what to call it. Jim Duggan beat Hennig via DQ in 141 when Rude handcuffed him to the corner until Neidhart and Bulldog made the save. At least it was short. Luger beat Glacier in 220 with a rack. Bagwell in his interview mentioned he was 5-1 against Luger. During this match, Schiavone said that Bagwell had never pinned Luger or made him submit. Actually, this was repeated by Tenay the following Monday. I know everyone would like to forget their match at Starrcade, but it wasn't a bad dream. Billy Kidman beat Psychosis in 3:38 when Parkachair shot at him and Kidman used the shooting star on him. Jericho came out with a scale to weigh the Prince. Schiavone was again totally disinterested in the angle. He claimed Prince weighed 218. Of course, Jericho clocked him with a scale and put him in the lion tamer and Prince was tapping like mad. I don't understand the logic of people tapping when it isn't a match. Like when you're on the street in an impromptu brawl and some guy is wailing on you, do you tap? Scott Steiner beat Disco in 2:36 with the recliner. T beat Jericho via DQ when Jericho threw the ref in the way in 5:06. Good TV match but not much of a finish. Jericho appeared to bust his mouth. Then came the moment of truth. All during the show they said that Flair hadn't arrived but they were expecting him. Schiavone came out and acted like he didn't want to be there, since he had to pretend the weather was bad and that's why Flair wasn't there as the live crowd booed and after they spent nearly 2 hours and much of Monday building to the interview. At this point they have to realize everyone is going to know, so why even bother with the BS weather excuse? Bischoff and Scott Steiner came out. Bischoff ripped on Flair. They showed clip of Hogan's new Ninja movie. Isn't it scary that Lonnie Anderson looks 15 years younger than Hulk on the screen and she's got to be no less than 10 years older? Arn Anderson showed up and to show WCW's bad luck, delivered probably the worst interview of his career with the classic line, "It says Marquee on the wrestling." Steiner acted like he wanted to attack Arn, like he has any right to jump a guy for delivering a bad promo. Luger made the save and somehow in all of this Rick Steiner suplexed Bischoff on the floor. Unfortunately, Bischoff is taking bumps for no psychological reason, so unlike last year when it was a big deal to see him bump, now it's like it was in ECW when Todd Gordon would get bumped and it's a midget comedy spot. And I'm sure that suplex on the floor had to hurt. Rick Steiner beat Nash via DQ in 2:54 when Conan interfered. Scott gave brother Rick a low blow. Nash gave Rick the power bomb and when the Dillinger gang tried to arrest him, the NWO blocked the way. Isn't that resisting arrest or something like that? Somehow Giant got in the ring and headbutted Nash a few times. Chad Fortune and Dale Torborg are being featured on the WCW Motorsports deals because they are going to come in as a tag team doing a pit crew gimmick. Hey, it did wonders for the career of Bob Holly, and he was at least a car racer which has some glamour. Pit crew isn't exactly a television star type of gimmick. Fortune played tight end at the University of Louisville when Eric Watts played QB and was a hell of a player. Torborg's father was semi-famous baseball player and manager Jeff Torborg. The May 17th Slamboree pay-per-view from Worcester, Massachusetts sold 6,802 tickets for $254,000 on the first day. They were put on sale in a building set up for about 9,000, so it should be just about sold out by the end of the week. May 11th, Kansas City Nitro at Kemper Arena sold nearly 13,000 tickets the first day, and all that are left are obstructed view seats. May 18th, Nitro from Providence sold about 6,500 tickets first day they were put on sale. WCW will announce its June 16th Nitro from the Nassau Coliseum this week. They wanted to wait until after the WWF event on April 14th to make the announcement. The Hogan 3 Ninjas movie was an incredible bomb, opening over the weekend, doing just $150,137 for number 33 in the box office. It got fairly bad reviews as well, but the reviews were no worse than any of his other movies. But from a box office standpoint, none of his stuff has ever opened this soft. Ricky Steamboat has threatened Ultimo Dragon with a lawsuit for using the name Dragon, which Steamboat has trademarked for usage as a pro wrestler in the US. It's really too bad. WCW really did screw Steamboat at the end after he suffered the career-ending back injury by then firing him after all the classic matches and how much he helped make the wrestlers he worked with over the years. WCW also screwed its pay-per-view audience at the end by keeping Steamboat's injury a secret before a pay-per-view match with Steve Austin, even though they knew weeks in advance he couldn't wrestle the date, and then bringing in Jim Duggan as a sub. But Dragon is an innocent party in all this who made his name all over the world before ever coming to the US, and it isn't like he's stolen somebody else's gimmick to get over. If Dragon undergoes a name change, that's why. Al's shows this week were April 7th in Fort Myers, Florida, which drew $2,758 and $56,490. April 8th in Fort Pierce, Florida, which drew $2,711 and $50,010. April 10th in Montgomery, Alabama, which drew $4,537 and $95,590, and April 11th in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which drew $8,226 and $144,675. Merchandise for the week was $352,727, or $8.76 per head. They debuted the Goldberg t-shirts over the weekend. Big sellers everywhere. To know that in Minneapolis alone, the Goldberg t-shirts alone accounted for $28,000 or 18% of total merchandise. Not much as far as the shows went. Flair Hennig headlined the Florida shows and Paige Nash headlined Montgomery and Chattanooga, with Flair and Paige getting clean wins. Goldberg worked 2 matches with Finlay that went 10 to 15 minutes, and Finlay did a great job with him in both. Disco Inferno was still using the Chartbuster on the road. Guess he's only banned from using it on television. Only notes from the Saturday night tapings on April 14th in Mankato, Minnesota. Nothing really special, although Kidman beating Guerrero Jr. is a minor surprise. Raven was wearing the U.S. title in a match that airs after the pay-per-view and beat Disco Inferno. That doesn't necessarily mean he wins the title, as he could still lose but steal it again, or it could be edited out, but the most likely of the three is he's winning. The sad part about the Spring Stampede pay-per-view is that not only does nobody know the lineup, but the worst part of it is it doesn't seem like anybody cares either. In television ratings, for the month of February in England, Nitro was beating Raw consistently for the first time ever by a 242,000 to 229,000 average. Starting in March, the two shows went basically head-to-head, each has a little overlap period. For the first 2 weeks of March, Nitro averaged 259,000 homes and Raw averaged 226,000 homes, although the No Way Out pay-per-view show, which aired live starting at midnight, did 292,000 homes live. I believe Goldberg's contract should be just about due if he hasn't already resigned. He doesn't look likely to be going anywhere. WCW Saturday Night on April 11th fell to a 1.8 rating. WWF. The WWF is now estimated WrestleMania at 715,000 to 720,000 buys, or a 2.3 buy rate, or a $10,821,000 company pay-per-view gross, which would be the largest company pay-per-view gross in history. Most independent sources have upped estimates into the 700,000 range as well. Wrestlers, particularly those high on the card, should be getting some huge pay-per-view payoffs in about 7 weeks. Raw on April 13th in Philadelphia drew a sellout 14,280, paying $253,214. It was the only domestic show of the week, and merchandise was $153,659 for $10.76 per head. It opened with Steve Austin telling Vince McMahon to come out and challenging him to a fight, doing the famous hard way or easy way speech. Used first, according to legend, by Strangler Lewis when he got in the ring with Ed Don George in a 1931 world title match where George didn't know ahead of time he was dropping the strap, and used since then in similar situations both in reality and probably in a few people's fantasies as well. It was a tremendous deal which set the tone for the rest of the show. McMahon came out with two supposed SWAT team guys, indie wrestlers Donnie B and Gino Caruso, along with Jerry Briscoe and Pat Patterson. Austin challenged him to a title match. A chain match with Skull and 8-Ball versus Savio Vega and Jose Estrada Jr. lasted all of 2:15 before DX attacked DOA, and then as they celebrated with Savio and Jose, China gave both low blows, turning on them. It was explained it was a no contest because in a chain match there is no DQ. Try and make sense out of that since a no contest is basically a double DQ. It was horrible. Chains did a stretcher job. The story behind that is that the week before WrestleMania he was sent home because he was in no condition to work. He nearly lost his job, but since he's friends with Undertaker they gave him another chance, and led him to Mania and this TV before doing the injury angle to send him home. Undertaker came out and destroyed Aguila, Pantera and Scott Taylor. Brian Christopher was allowed to escape unharmed, and asked for Kane to come out. Jeff Jarrett's ring entrance now includes confetti coming from the ceiling. His match with Taka Michinoku was another of those division-destroying one-sided squashes, ending actually with Taka winning via DQ when Club Kamikaze attacked him. Jarrett put the figure 4 on him after the match. KK had no manager as the original plan was for him to debut on this show. Farouk came out and challenged the Nation of Domination. When they came out, Ken Shamrock and Steve Blackman came out to help Farouk and they had an impromptu brawl and Shamrock was legit injured during it. Terry Funk brought out his mystery tag team partner as Flash Funk, which didn't get over at all live, although Funk got a huge pop in Philadelphia, and they beat the Quebecers. Jim Ross called him Too Cold Scorpio and he used the Scorpio Splash and made a big deal about him being misused and not being given a chance and how Funk is giving him the chance. Luna came out and challenged Sable. Goldust then came out dressed as Sable and Luna ripped Goldust's dress off, leaving him in women's underwear. Then Sable came out and they began ripping at each other. Shamrock and Blackman went to a double disqualification with Midnight Express in a match with a work rate and ending reminiscent of one of those WCW Hennig and Adams vs. Bulldog and Neidhart specials. They did a stare down with Shamrock and Severn before the match. Holly was looking good until missing a Frankensteiner, which the crowd was unmerciful about. Shamrock was limping badly from the earlier brawl. McMahon did yet another interview talking about how he wasn't afraid of the federal government, he wasn't afraid of Turner and Time Warner. This actually got a big babyface pop. And he's not afraid of Austin. Headbangers came out but Undertaker thrashed them until Kane came out. Paul Bearer said Kane would fight him next week in their parents' graveyard. Val Venis was coming again. Actually his delivery needs a lot of work, but the lines they give him are hilarious. He was with 2 strippers they got from Scores. I don't know why this reminds me of this. Well, actually it's obvious. But there will be a nude World Order 2 porn movie. Not sure if The Observer will make the sequel as it was shown subliminally in the first one but given another name, so I guess as not to make my reputation any worse since I didn't know about it until they told me after the movie was done. Owen Hart pinned Billy Gunn in 8:39 with a schoolboy out of nowhere in a decent match. DX was with Jim Ross on commentary. Helmsley was hilarious ripping on LOD. They all brawled after it was over. You know the story on McMahon vs. Austin and Dude Love showing up. Here are the notes we have from the Raw taping for April 20th on April 14th before a sellout at Nassau Coliseum. Darren Drostoff beat Dr. X, Tom Pritchard, in a tryout match. Venice beat Sean Stasiak in a dark match. Adam Copeland also won a dark squash. Raw opened with a segment called Love Shack with Dude Love. McMahon yelled at him for interfering in his match and fined him $5,000. Farouk beat Kama in a street fight. DX did an interview and LOD 2000 came out to build to the main event. Severn beat Mosh. Luna did an interview about the Striper match. Bradshaw pinned Goldust. Austin did an interview and challenged McMahon again. Funk and Scorpio beat Midnight Express in a non-title match. So much for credibility for those belts, although they had none to begin with to lose. Sable did an interview saying she doesn't care if she gets all her clothes torn off as long as she gets a hold of Luna. Who comes up with these lines? Outlaws and Triple H beat LOD 2000 and Owen and China attacked Sonny. Final saw Dude Love beat Blackman. McMahon was announcing at this point and Austin came out and attacked him and the show ended with McMahon challenging Austin to another match. Somewhere in the show they had an Undertaker-Kane confrontation in the graveyard which ended with Kane setting fire to the caskets of their mother and father. In the dark match Austin and Funk and Farouk beat Outlaws and Maivia in 6:19. Last word we had is that Earl Hebner was still in intensive care but his condition was improving. There was nothing to all the rumors about Abdullah the Butcher or Jacqueline Moore coming in nor of Marlena managing Val Venis. WWF has at least inquired about Jenna Jameson managing Venice as ECW was asked about their deal with her, and that's coming to an end anyway. Pit Bulls were backstage at the show in Philadelphia. Don't know yet if there's something to read into that or not. Geez, I don't know. They plead guilty to trafficking even if they got a light sentence by turning in bigger fish. Shawn Michaels was the Grand Marshal of a masquerade parade in San Antonio over the weekend. While his name will continue to be mentioned on TV and he will return at some time, there are no plans at all in the works for him other than he'll return and either rejoin DX, probably after teasing a breakup, or feud with DX, probably after teasing the breakup was a swerve as a double swerve. There are a lot of major behind-the-scenes problems with him that need to be rectified when it comes to behavior, as opposed to behavior in televised angles, and the key apparently was making sure to get the belt off him, and it has turned into an issue with lawyers involved. Steve Regal officially signed on April 9th. His contract actually starts whenever it is legal for it to do so. His WCW contract expires on April 24th, however there is a lengthy no-compete clause in the contract. Again, with Georgia being a right-to-work state, WWF is going to legally challenge the no-compete. However, he needs to drop weight anyway and won't be put on television until he's in condition. Regal is friends with Austin, so he's being brought in for a program with Austin, which means he needs to be in main event condition. The no-compete lasts through the late summer, so he probably won't be around until maybe summer. Slam! There will be a major summer non-pay-per-view spectacular, probably taped for home video, on August 8th at Foxborough, Massachusetts Stadium, which is the same night as WCW Road Wild. The Germany tour saw business at about 75% of capacity, which is considered very good because entertainment acts in Germany haven't been drawing well. The only injury was to Henry Godwinn, who missed a few dates due to back spasms. On the tour, they switched all the Rocky Maivia IC title matches to tag matches with D'Lo Brown carrying the load, as Maivia really couldn't take any bumps due to his internal injuries. Really not much else about the German tour other than complaints about long and uncomfortable bus trips due to massive construction on the highways. WWF has lost its television in Germany, as the only outlet is a subscription TV station that broadcasts 24 hours a day of wrestling, and WWF wants off that station because of the belief being on the station positions them as just another wrestling promotion. Whatever rumors there were about Raw leaving USA or moving to Tuesdays were squashed when USA released its fall schedule. They'll be doing movies in prime time from Tuesday through Friday and leaving Monday alone for wrestling. With Kate Koplowitz, who headed the station, gone, there is speculation and nothing more than even with the big ratings that they may have to dumb things down, since Barry Diller has ordered Jerry Springer, which gets even bigger ratings and is now beating Oprah, to tone down the show. X-Pac's first wrestling match should be either in or in the build-up to King of the Ring. Steve Austin vs. Mark Marrow is only going to be used as the main event on May 16th in Anaheim, California. The MSG show listed here is going to be totally reworked, and there will probably be a tag match as the main event. Phil LaFon is either undergoing or has just undergone shoulder surgery. There are no plans to bring he and Doug Furnas back. Marrow missed the TV tapings due to pneumonia. Among the wrestlers getting look-sees in Philadelphia were Ace Darling, Devon Storm, the Misfits, Steve Corino, and Mexican wrestler Mariachi, not sure who. Heard Darling, Storm, and Corino looked good, and Misfits didn't. Scott Taylor will be given the nickname Too Hot and form a regular team with Brian Christopher as Too Hot and Too Sexy. August television tapings will be August 10th in Omaha, August 11th in Des Moines, August 24th in Philadelphia, August 31st in New Haven, and September 1st in Springfield, Massachusetts. There will be a pay-per-view on September 27th in Hamilton, ONT, and another one on December 13th in Vancouver, BC, leading to WrestleMania at Skydome. So they are really gearing up at keeping Canada their territory before WCW attempts an invasion. Livewire on April 11th did a 1.4 rating, and Superstars on April 12th did a 1.9. And from Phil Mushnick in the April 6th New York Post, credit is due the New York Times for its page 1 story last week that revealed pro wrestling to be so pervaded with degenerate acts that eyes no longer suitable for viewing by children. Pretty sharp observation, given that this story is about 15 years old. If the Times stays on top of things, it will be able to report that pro wrestling is infested with steroid abuse and other illegal drug use, a story that's about a dozen years old, and that pro wrestlers have this nasty habit of dropping dead or committing suicide at around age 30, a story that's only about 10 years old. The Reader's Pages. Dedge. Regarding the very tragic death of Douglas Dedge, I somehow feel I have to comment. I was present, as a competitor at the 1984 Florida State AAU Taekwondo Championships where a young man named Byron Salter was killed. Byron trained at the same facility as I did. While we were never what could be considered friends, we knew each other well from training together. The blow that led by Byron's death was a spinning heel kick which caught him in the temple and knocked him out on his feet. This caused him to fall backwards onto a hardwood, not the newer, softer rubber, basketball court. Unfortunately, Byron was not wearing any headgear and suffered brain damage, which led to his death. Why is any of this relevant to the Douglas Dedge situation? For 3 reasons. First, something like this can happen no matter what safeguards are put into place or what sanctioning that may be utilized. Don't forget, this was an AAU-sponsored event. Even if every NHB event was to be sanctioned by every state athletic commission that could put its hands in the pockets of the promoters, it is doubtful this type of incident could be avoided. Second, Byron died doing something that he loved. While I'm sure that had he known the outcome, he would not have competed on that day, he did know the risks involved. We all do. Even after seeing what happened to Byron, I continued to be competitive in the martial arts for many years. Third, after Byron's death, the Taekwondo competitions, at least the ones I attended, tried to make things safer. They started requiring competitors to wear headgear. Prior to that, headgear was mandatory, but nobody actually ever wore it. Explain that one. And they specifically barred any contact to the face and head. The headgear remained mandatory for the duration while I was active. The facial/cranial contact rule was forgotten about 2 competitions later. Because that's what all the competitors wanted. If you have no competitors, you have no sport. No matter how safe you try and make sports, there will always be an element of danger. Unfortunate, sometimes even tragic events are going to happen. Why not just put in enough safety standards, the cage, the referee, doctors, and time limits in place and let the market determine if the sport is going to continue? It's very sad that the politicians will use, very important word, use, this young man's death as a soapbox for their money-making crusades against a legitimate athletic contest. Wesley Daniel, Sherman Oaks, California. Norton versus Guerrera. I don't agree with you regarding matches such as Juventud Guerrera versus Scott Norton. True, the way WCW presented the match was terrible, but there has to be room in life for us to believe in the David versus Goliath concept. One of my favorite wrestlers years ago was Ricky Morton, the small guy who was able to pull out victories against larger opponents. I can still recall a great Mid-South match where Terry Taylor pinned Kimala. And Keith Hackney beating Emmanuel Yarbrough remains my most exciting UFC memory. The problem wasn't the size difference. The problem is that Norton wouldn't sell for him. It's a shame when it gets down to that, because to me the appeal of wrestling has always been that the underdog can win. A winless team like the Indianapolis Colts can beat the previously unbeaten Super Bowl champions. In real life, nobody is invincible. Anyone can get knocked off balance, get the breath knocked out of them, etc. I never expected Guerrera to win, but Norton could have given him a lot, taken one big bump and been hit with the 450 before kicking out. The idea that little guys can only beat little guys, while the big guys never actually beat each other, kills everything. James Hold. Houston, Texas. Hall of Fame. My major concerns are the women wrestlers on your list. On one level or another, every woman you listed deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Lioness Asuka should be a given, regardless of your criticism that she hasn't been a big deal in the business since her return. Chigusa Nagio as a solo entity was a major superstar, but the Crush Gals as a concept were equally influential, and as such, they both deserve to be included. Coming into the Dream Slam period, Akira Hokuto was a legitimate superstar. Had she been put on top as champion then, she could have easily carried the promotion. It's insulting that it never happened. With Bull Nakano, you overlooked that she was the top star for AJW as the company was in the midst of regaining its past success. Nakano's hot runs with Hokuto and especially Asia Kong were more than a little responsible for rebuilding the popularity. Kong was, and still is to some degree, a big player and a big star that can't be excluded either. The only 2 women on your list that fall short are Manami Toyota and Kyoko Inoue. While a great ring technician, Toyota has always failed at every other aspect that makes for a well-rounded performer. She had no ring presence, no personality, and little psychology. In many respects, she still wrestles like a preliminary girl. Inoue may have been a Hall of Famer, but AJW missed their opportunity to put her on top when she was at her peak. We'll never know what sort of an impact she could have made. She was a sensational performer, and to some degree still is, but should have been given a shot. Frank Strom. Revere, Massachusetts. The biggest hole I can see in the Observer Hall of Fame is the omission of one of the most neglected stars in the sport's history, Frank Sexton. During the 1940s, admittedly a period when the business was at its lowest point, Sexton's claim to the world heavyweight title was stronger than any wrestler of that period. During that period there were two true world title claims, the one in the Midwest, National Wrestling Association and later National Wrestling Alliance, and the East Coast. Sexton was the champion on the East Coast and held the AWA title that was the championship in Boston that could be traced back to Steve Casey's victory over MWA World Champion Lou Thesz on February 11, 1938. Sexton claimed a title that went through Jim Londos, Branko Nagurski and Dean Dedden to David Levin's win over Ali Baba on April 24, 1936, when he defeated Babe Sharkey in Baltimore on January 29, 1946. Londos had been stripped of the title that he had won from Nagurski in March 1944 for not defending it. Of course, Londos continued to claim the title wherever he went and took that version of the title to his grave. This championship was claimed as the true world championship by Ring magazine, but their enthusiasm stagnated once it was worn by Londos. The belt worn by Sexton was the same belt that Strangler Lewis wore, which historically outranks the Thesz NWA title belt that was originated in 1937. The other major champion of the 40s was Bill Longson. In 18 matches, Sexton won 9 times, lost once, and had 8 draws. Against Thesz he was 0-10-2. Sexton held the title from June 27, 1945 through May 23, 1950, one of the longest reigns in history. He had title unification matches during this period against all the other champions, Longson, Sharkey, Enrique Torres, world champion in California, Thesz, Cliff Gustafson, Minneapolis world champion, and Orville Brown, first NWA world champion. In his career he wrestled John Pesek, Everett Marshall, Fred Grubmayer, Dick Schicott, Ray Steele, George Tragos, Yvonne Robert, Buddy Rogers, Gorgeous George, Whipper Watson, Earl McCready, Bert Asarati and all the top stars of his time. While champion he was respected enough to never get double-crossed. 3 days after dropping the title to Don Eagle, Eagle was set up by the promoters in Chicago. There is no film of him available and I never saw him wrestle, but from what I've read and from his record, I believe he deserves a place in any pro wrestling hall of fame. Steve Yohei. Montebello, California. You can't keep people like Michael Hayes and Barry Windham out of the Hall of Fame just because of their current status. They are older and can no longer be main event wrestlers, but they still have a right to earn a living. You wouldn't keep Buster Keaton out of a comedy hall of fame because he was in Beach Blanket Bingo. Is Kevin Von Erich more deserving of Michael Hayes because he got out of the business, and Hayes didn't? John Duffy. High Bridge, New Jersey. A few months ago I had a dream I was watching Raw and Jeff Jarrett showed up and went on about how horrendous his Double J gimmick was the first time he was in the WWF and how this time he was going to do things his way. It seemed so real, but I guess it was only a dream, or I'm paying too much attention, or I'm having a serious case of deja vu. Is it just me or is LOD 2000 the same bad wrestlers in different pants? Regarding the Hall of Fame, Jimmy Snuka definitely belongs in. When I was a kid, he was so far and away the most popular wrestler around. The reason I became a wrestling fan is because on Saturday morning a friend was crying because of the Don Morocco/Jimmy Snuka microphone angle. I wanted to know who this guy was that he was always making such a big deal about. Where to Ted DiBiase, Rick Rude, Greg Valentine, Jimmy Hart, Brian Pillman, Paul Orndorff and Arn Anderson fit in? I would say DiBiase should be in. Rude and Anderson are probables and the rest fall just short. The reason I bring up Orndorff is because he headlined 2 of the biggest shows in history, WrestleMania I and the 1986 Toronto show. Jimmy Hart was always the number 2 manager behind Bobby Heenan in WWF, but he was the lead guy in Memphis all those years. Whether that is enough to put him over the top, I don't know. He certainly has done nothing in WCW to help his cause. What do you think? Russ Kress. Union, New Jersey. Response from Dave Meltzer. DiBiase is in because he was generally a headliner everywhere he went from the late 70s until his retirement, and for most of that period was considered to be one of the 5 to 10 best workers in the business. The others mentioned were all major players, but I wouldn't consider any of them seriously as Hall of Fame candidates. Rude was a star and a good worker, but his run at the top was only a few years and he did a good job carrying Warrior but they didn't draw, and a great job with Sting, but it was in that program that he suffered the injuries that led to ending his career. Valentine had some good runs, but to me he's way short of Hall of Fame status. Hart in Memphis was the greatest manager I ever saw at carrying a territory, but he wasn't close to a Hall of Fame level performer once he went national. Pillman, no way at all. He was a good worker, but never one of the very best. And he was never a headliner. Orndorff I'd consider more than the others due to the Hogan run, but he still falls short. Anderson was a very good worker and a fantastic talker but was never a headliner on his own. To me, Hall of Fame should be reserved for legends of the sport. To me, the litmus question is always, was this person a bigger star worldwide or a better worker than Dick Murdoch, who to me is the level of guys who don't make it by a hair? DiBiase was on the same level as a star and a more consistent worker, probably better as well, although some would debate that, but nobody could debate that DiBiase was more consistent. Rude, Valentine, Pillman, Orndorff and Anderson weren't close to Murdoch as a worldwide star, particularly when longevity and different areas are factored in, and of that group, none were better workers, although Anderson and maybe Orndorff come close and Valentine in his prime may have come close. Gilbert. We would like to express our sincere appreciation to pro wrestling promoter Dennis Corraluzzo and all the wrestling fans who have made the Eddie Gilbert Memorial Weekend a success for the last 3 years. Dennis does a wonderful job and puts in a lot of hard and stressful work to help with the Eddie Gilbert Scholarship Fund. He was one of Eddie's best friends and Eddie would be so proud to know that he is being honored in such a special way. Education was very important to Eddie and he would be happy to know that Dennis has helped so much with the scholarship fund. The fans were always important to Eddie and he would be proud of each and every one of them that have continued to keep his memory alive. Tommy, Peggy, Kim, and Doug Gilbert. Lexington, Tennessee. Bischoff. My main complaints about Eric Bischoff's interview on TSN are: 1. It was way too short. They just touched the tip of the iceberg on so many issues. It was the fastest half-hour show I've watched in my life. 2. When confronted by Michael Lonsberg about Kevin Nash, Bischoff never brought up that he wasn't the boss during the Vinny Vegas and Oz days. That was during the Jim Herd reign. He could have agreed with Lonsberg on that one and said a thing or two of the lack of direction and organization during the Herd regime, but he didn't. 3. No talk at all about WCW doing a pay-per-view show, house shows or television tapings in Canada. I thought for sure that Lonsberg would ask him about that. They touched briefly on Bret Hart's WWF anti-American gimmick. I think Bret still needs to put proper closure to that issue by apologizing on the air to the American fans, and maybe in doing so include a dig at the WWF in the interview. Bo Hevich. Winnipeg, Manitoba. This is the end of this program. Thanks for